Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto fall in love with Shinigami Mother Bleach. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by WitcherBlue and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. A beginning within an end. Konoha outskirts. Onahagakure no Sato, more simply known as Konoha, was a sprawling shinobi village. Contained within its walls was not only the village proper, but also large swaths of nature around the outskirts. These areas contained both training grounds as well as untouched nature, and it's in one of these areas that our story begins. It was sunset, and we find a woman with pale skin, long red hair, and violet eyes relaxing against a tree near the bank of a river, wearing a white and green dress. This was Kushina Namikaze, formerly Uzumaki, the current Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yauko. She sighed as she sat against a tree, listening to the sounds of nature. The waterfall crashing somewhere upriver, the leaves rustling as the wind blew through them, and all the other little things as the sunset cast a warm glow on the area. This is always a nice place to come and relax, she thought to herself as she let a hand rest on her pregnant belly. It was a bit out of the way, but she'd be fine, and she needed this. There had been some security concerns lately, and Minato had assigned a few Anbu to watch her. It probably didn't hurt, since her seal was going to weaken when she gave birth, but it got so annoying to have people watching you all the time. So she'd given them the slip and decided to take a quick trip out here for some peace and quiet. They always fall for the camo sheet. All she had to do was turn a corner, throw up the sheet against a fence, and wait for them to leave. Worked every time. I'm gonna have to show you that trick someday, Naruto. She said as she looked down at her stomach. She couldn't wait for her little boy to arrive, and neither could Minato. Her husband was like an excited little kid, rambling on about all the things he was going to teach their son. He even said he was looking forward to helping Naruto with the ladies, to which Kushina could only suppress a laugh. He'd been as smooth as sandpaper when they were dating, but lucky for him she already liked him. She was almost ready to pop as well, so the wait was almost over. She sat there enjoying the quiet for a few minutes before deciding that it was probably time to get started back to the village. It was getting late and she didn't want to make Minato worry too much. As she got onto her feet and started the walk back, she started to feel uneasy. She didn't know what it was, but all of a sudden she just got a bad feeling. A shiver ran down her body as a chill swept through the area. That was weird, it was June, it shouldn't suddenly get cold like that. The bad feeling only intensified, and Kushina's instincts were screaming at her that something was very wrong. Maybe it was an animal or something. As goosebumps started to creep along her skin, she realized why it was so eerie. There was no sound. The wind had stopped blowing. There were no birds chirping in the evening light, no bushes rustling, nothing. The unnatural quiet settled on her like a heavy, uncomfortable blanket, and she decided that she needed to get out of there, now. So she started moving as fast as her body would allow, which wasn't very fast, unfortunately for her. All of a sudden, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's ability to sense negative emotions activated, and Kushina felt something terrifying. It was right behind her. Kushina ducked and felt something pass over her head with a rush of air. Kushina moved forward and turned around to find nothing. She was sure something was there. She reached out with her senses, using Kyuubi's ability again. Her breath hitched as she sensed it again, a massive wall of emptiness, pain, and hunger. It was right in front of her, and getting closer, it was invisible. Well, whatever it was, Kushina didn't waste any time, she quickly summoned her chains and threw them forward. She watched them carefully, and the second one looked like it hit something that wasn't there. She commanded them to wrap around and capture it, and they did. Whatever it was tall, but only a bit bigger than her. Kushina was evaluating her next move when a snapping sound entered her ears. It was breaking her chains. She needed to do something fast, so she used her chains to throw her attacker as far away as she could. Get the fuck away from me, you creepy asshole. After it got thrown, she touched a seal on her arm and removed a kunai with a special paper bomb attached. She tossed it into the air and set it off as she turned to keep moving back to the village. The one damn time she'd forgotten Minato's kunai. Minato's office. Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage, sighed to himself as he leaned back in his chair. He'd finally managed to get all his paperwork done, and now it was time to head home. He'd been worried when Kushina lost her protection to Tail, but what could he do? She was always good at losing a tail. Something he would guiltily admit to knowing from experience. In his defense, he was just too nervous to approach her when he was younger. Speaking of Kushina, a deafening explosion sounded as a crimson-red cloud of fire appeared over the village outskirts. He knew what that explosion was, an attack signal, and there was only one person who made them that shade of red. Kushina Anbu on me, now. Saru, get the village secure, then get the rest of the Anbu to that signal. Hi. Kushina was taking deep breaths and trying to calm herself down. Hopefully that would get this thing off her trail long enough for her to escape, or at least long enough for reinforcements to arrive. She leaned back against a tree, stretching the Kyuubi's sensing ability to its limits. Soon enough, she felt it. Whatever it was following her. She held her breath, hoping it would give up and leave. It was moving slowly, probably trying to pick up her trail, but it wouldn't. Kushina may have been pregnant, but she was still able to hide without leaving evidence as to where she was. Now all she had to do was wait for it to move on. Just stay calm, Kushina. It has no idea where you are. Kushina didn't even have time to react as it suddenly appeared on the other side of the tree, and her blood ran cold as a sudden wooden snap rang out. A drop of sweat ran down her face as the tree behind her fell over, crashing into the ground. She got ready to run, only to freeze. All of a sudden, it felt like this insane weight was dropped on top of her. She nearly blacked out just from feeling it. It was like something was gripping her very soul. Kushina slowly placed a hand on her stomach. It's okay, Naruto, we'll make it through this. Kachan will keep you safe. Kushina shook with fear as she slowly turned her head, and she saw it. Well, not completely. All she saw was the foggy image of something standing there. It looked like it was vaguely human-shaped, with what looked like an extremely long tail. Kushina turned to face it and slowly backed away. What are you? She asked, her voice shaking. It let out a haunting laugh, its voice sounding like it was coming from behind a wall. And you can see me already? Usually it takes longer. Oh well, this just makes it more fun. Its voice was filled with sick amusement. Suddenly it moved forward, its tail lashing forward and carving a rut in the ground right next to Kushina's foot. She jumped away only for it to make another one on the other side. Kushina backed up as it continued forward, continuing its little game of terrorizing Kushina. The Redeed grit her teeth and once again summoned her chains, only for it to grab one and use it to toss Kushina to the side. That's not going to work again. I've never come across a human with a power like that before. You're going to be fun. Kushina pushed herself to her feet, now even more scared than before. She thought that this was an attack by another village, but it was clear now that this thing just wanted to kill, and it was playing with her. Thinking quickly, Kushina crawled over to a clear patch of ground and bit into her finger, scrawling something on the ground. It watched her, amused. Oh. What are you working on down there? Trying to scrawl a dying message, human. Go right ahead, I won't stop you. Kushina finished her work and lunged forward as best as she could, getting onto her feet and continuing toward the village. It sighed and went after her, intending to step on her message. Then once it did, a bunch of lines spread out and worked their way up its body. It tried to move, only to find that whatever this was paralyzed him. You're full of surprises, go ahead and run. I'll hunt you down, and I'll tear you apart before swallowing that baby whole. Ahahaha. It laughed, taunting Kushina as she ran. Kushina tried her best to ignore its taunting, but the haunting voice filled her mind. She didn't know how long she'd been running, but she knew that she had to keep moving. It's alright, sweetie, we'll be safe soon. That seal might have been made quickly, but it was strong. It should hold long enough for her to. You know I love this. Kushina's eyes went wide as something tripped her. She fell onto her hands and knees and looked back to see it once again standing over her. The chase, the fear, the look on your face as my Ryatsu crushes you, it's killing you inside, isn't it? Knowing that you and your baby will die and there's nothing you can do about it. It's okay to tell me, I know exactly how you feel. After all then, two things became clear enough to make out, a hole and a mask. The hole was a clean circle, right where its stomach would be, and it went clean through, though the mask was what really caught her attention. It looked like it was made out of bone and had a mouth of razor-sharp teeth. Though nothing else caught her attention after she saw the eyes. Horrible yellow eyes with black sclera gazing at her with a sick and twisted light to them. I used to be human too. Kushina tried to get up, but her legs just wouldn't move. It was all too much, it felt like her soul was being crushed. But she couldn't give up, she had to keep going. This thing was not touching her child. You aren't going to lay a finger on my baby, you wannabe Bujiman. Kushina dug deep and brought as much of her chakra as she could to the surface, chains exploding from almost every bit of her body. They wrapped around every bit of the monster, who just seemed to be observing the chains this time. It let out a little chuckle as one of her chains wrapped around its head, trying to crush it. How's this for fun? She yelled out as the blade on the end of the chain around its head stabbed through the eye hole. Jai-ah. It roared out as blood flew from the socket. With another roar of rage, it opened its mouth, some kind of red ball of energy forming in front of it. Zero. It screamed as Kushina dropped to the ground. A beam of energy flew over her, carving a trench into the ground before finally colliding with something and exploding, briefly lighting up the darkness of dusk. Kushina looked up, her eyes wide with fear at the damage this thing had caused with one attack. Then the pressure on her doubled, she couldn't move a muscle, it felt like someone had dumped a bucket of freezing cold water on her very soul. I was going to play with you a little longer, but now you've made me angry. I'll make you watch while I tear that pathetic thing out of your stomach and rip it apart limb by limb. Before Kushina could react, it gripped her by the throat, lifting her into the air. Kushina tried kicking it and prying its fingers off, but to no avail. No. she cried in her mind as its grip cut off her breathing. Kushina summoned more of her chakra and wrapped her chains around its arm, trying to snap it or at least move it. The creature completely ignored them and instead raised the pressure even higher. Spot swam in Kushina's vision, its very presence threatening to suffocate her. Please, don't hurt him." She managed to get out. "Oh no, no no, you lost the right to beg when you stabbed me in the fucking eye. Not that I would have spared you if you'd begged before." It raised its arm to make good on its threat, only to hesitate as a lot of signatures entered its sensory range. All of them had powerful signatures like the woman it growled. As much as it wanted to take its time and torture her, if all of them had abilities like hers and weren't weighed down by pregnancy, then it might actually die. She clearly knew they were coming too, if the hope in her eyes was any indication. What's with that look? She looked back at it, startled. "You think you're safe? It would be a shame to ruin the fun, but killing her quickly would have to do then." An evil thought came to it. "You know what? I think I'll leave you with something to remember me by. I'm just sad I won't get to be here and watch you suffer while your child dies." Its arm came down, pointed at her stomach, before all its pressure settled on her, or more specifically, something inside her. Kushina's eyes widened in terror as it let go, dropping her to the ground. "No, no. What did you do?" she screamed as it started to disappear. "Ahaha, you may have escaped me, but I'll make sure you never forget me," it said maniacally as it completely disappeared. Kushina struggled to her feet and managed to get up just as Minato and a full squad of Anbu appeared. Minato rushed to her. "Are you alright? What happened?" She then took a second to look around at the destruction, particularly the giant trench and crater. What did this? "No time. Hospital, now." It did something to Naruto. Minato nodded, picking her up. "Search the village. I want whoever or whatever did this dead by morning. Konoha Hospital at Mitsunade, now." Minato yelled out as he carried Kushina into the hospital. Kushina was practically hyperventilating. The stress of the last few hours was taking its toll. "Kushina, you need to calm down, just take deep breaths." Kushina seemed to heed his words as her breathing slowed. "I'm already here." A busty blonde woman asked as she entered the lobby with a teenage dark-haired girl. "I want two of our best to assist me, yesterday. You too, Shizune, we might need you." She then motioned for Minato to follow her. They headed to the nearest empty room and got Kushina onto a bed. Tsunade started checking her over. "Kushina, what happened? Where are you injured?" Kushina pushed Tsunade's hand away. "Forget me, check on Naruto. It did something to him." At her insistence, Tsunade moved to checking on the baby. She couldn't sense anything wrong, but something felt off. She switched between different diagnostic jutsu until something made her gasp. What's happening?" "His soul is dying," she said before turning to the door as two other doctors fully prepped for surgery came in. They both jumped as Tsunade immediately got them working. "Get the hell over here, we've got a baby with a degrading soul." They both scrambled over to her. "We can't fix it while he's in the womb, we'll have to do a C-section and help him after he's out." She started barking orders. "You two, start using Tamashi no Hosen, keep his soul intact while I help Kushina. Shizune, you'll be my nurse." "Why yes, Tsunade-sensei," Shizune said as she quickly got ready. She was still relatively new to emergency operations, and what better way to ease someone into it than a C-section on a pregnant Jinchuriki to save a dying baby. Of course she didn't dare say this out loud or Tsunade would probably kill her. Speaking of Tsunade, the slug princess was in deep thought. Techniques that attack the soul directly were rare, but there were ways to counter them. However, she couldn't use them on an unborn baby. Kushina was close enough to the due date that Naruto should be healthy, but the timing on getting him out and healing his soul would be close. As they got Kushina set up for the C-section, Minato couldn't stop himself from asking, "What do you mean his soul is dying? Is he gonna be alright?" He watched as the two assistants' hands glowed pure white against Kushina's stomach. "It'll be close, but if we can get him out then we can help him." "Shizune, go to the front desk and tell the nurse we need a surgery room prepped for an emergency C-section." Shizune was about to get to it when Kushina spoke up. "No." Everyone looked to her in surprise. "I don't care about anesthetic, I don't care about the procedure or any of that other shit. Cut me open, get Naruto out, and help him," she said, looking Tsunade directly in the eye. "Fine, alright Shizune, change of plans, you'll be on suction duty, tell the nurse we need a pump for amniotic fluid. Also give Kushina that towel, she's gonna need something to bite on." What followed was a hasty and painful experience for Kushina. They even had to try some unorthodox cutting to keep from disturbing the Kyuubi seal. Nobody had ever tried a C-section on a Jinchuriki, and they really didn't want to take any chances with the first one. Normally there would be a lot more cleanliness and preparation involved in a C-section, but they didn't have the luxury of time. Kushina spent most of the operation gripping the sheets and screaming into the towel. It only took about 30 minutes, but it felt like hours knowing that every second counted. It was made even worse by the assistants commenting that they couldn't keep Naruto's soul intact, it was wasting away too fast for them to keep up. Thankfully, Naruto was brought into the world not long after that. Tsunade idly realized that he looked just like a miniature Minato. Tsunade immediately moved him to a side table while Minato comforted Kushina, "Shizune, stitch her up. You two, keep using the jutsu while I heal him." Once she started working on fixing Naruto's soul, she realized that it was much worse than she thought. His soul was dying quickly and she didn't know if she could help him in time. Tsunade shook her head, she couldn't think like that. This would work, she knew it. It was a race against the clock as Tsunade worked tirelessly to help the newborn Naruto, and it was a race Naruto was losing. His skin was pale, he wasn't making a sound, and he was barely moving. Come on, come on. I'm almost there. It was going to be even closer than she thought, but she had to do this. The taint was almost purged, but Naruto's soul was almost completely lost. Tsunade raised her hand, glowing and covered with blinding white chakra, and pushed it all inside Naruto at the exact instant that the last bit of his soul was snuffed out. Everyone watched as little Naruto stopped moving completely, the life leaving his eyes. All was silent before Tsunade sensed his soul spring back to life. Naruto let out a loud cry, the color slowly returning to his skin as he wiggled around. Tsunade breathed a sigh of relief, picking Naruto up and looking him over. It didn't look like there were any immediate problems. Did he always have those whisker marks? Whatever, it didn't matter. Tsunade handed him off to his mother before collapsing into a chair next to the bed. Kushina held Naruto close, his crying slowly subsiding now that he was safely with his parents. They both watched as his eyes opened up, showing that they were a vibrant blue. Kushina looked up at Minato, "I suppose you want to report on what happened." Minato shook his head with a smile, reaching down to brush a hand over Naruto's hair. "It can wait for now, let's get you two cleaned up and just relax, okay?" As the assistants got ready to move Kushina and clean Naruto up, Minato looked back down at his son. "Well, you certainly didn't come into the world." Kushina nodded, "See? I told you I'd protect you." Once they were moved and cleaned up, Kushina spent the rest of the night holding on to Naruto, as if she were afraid he would disappear if she let go. Little did she or Minato know that this event would send Naruto's life down a path none of them could have predicted. It was the next morning, Minato and Kushina were alone in the room as Tsunade had taken Naruto to get examined and make sure there weren't any lingering problems. "So, this invisible monster is what caused all that destruction?" Minato asked, getting Kushina's report. His wife had clearly been shaken by the incident, but she was still able to get through what happened. As she spoke, it became clear that the incident had left scars with Kushina, and why wouldn't it? The only reason she'd survived as long as she had was because it was taking pleasure in toying with her. Kushina nodded, her breathing shaky. "So, did they find the thing?" she asked before another question came to mind. "You really didn't see that beam?" "It was clear as day to me." Minato shook his head, "No to both. We searched the entire village and didn't find anything. We're pretty sure it left." Apparently everything got quiet for one of the guards on the wall, then a portion of the wall was blasted outward, seemingly by nothing. As for the beam, it was weird. We could see and hear the destruction, but not the beam itself. The two sat in silence for a minute, trying to think of a reason for it. Then Minato got an idea. "Didn't it say you can already see me? Usually it takes longer." At Kushina's nod he continued, "Maybe the longer you stay near it, the less its invisibility affects you. That would explain why you could see it and the beam, but the rest of us couldn't. And that makes sense." She shivered, "I just hope that it never comes back." "Well, like you said, it's gone and we're all safe now." Kushina gave a warm smile in response. Their tender moment was then interrupted by a knocking on the window. They both turned to see a familiar figure with long white hair, giving them a goofy grin and a thumbs up. Minato gave an amused smile, opening the window. "You know, it wouldn't kill you to use the door, sensei." Jiraiya shrugged, "I was going to, but the nurse at the register wouldn't tell me what room you were in." Apparently Tsunade told everyone that your room was off limits, though she may have been annoyed that I appreciated her figure. He looked around with a smile. "So, where is the little guy?" Kushina crossed her arms. "Tsunade took him to check up on him. I don't understand why she couldn't just do it here." "Oh, and Jiraiya, we've got something for you to be on the lookout for." "I heard, some invisible beast, right?" Minato and Kushina spent the next few minutes regaling Jiraiya with all the events of the previous night, and by the end the Toad Sage was shaking his head in disbelief. "Damn, well, it's a good thing I was close to the village when you contacted me. Now I can get started on finding out about this thing quickly." His face then relaxed, "But first I'd like to meet my godson." As if the universe was listening, the door to the room slid open and Tsunade stepped in holding a giggling Naruto. "Hey there, princess. How is he?" Tsunade looked up at him and he immediately knew that something was wrong. "Tsunade." Everyone looked over to her as the blonde woman walked over to Kushina and handed Naruto to her. Naruto is." She stopped, seeming to not know what to say. Kushina looked up at her, holding Naruto close. "What is it? Is he alright?" Tsunade sighed before massaging her temples. "Physically speaking, he's fine. I couldn't find anything wrong with him, except goddammit, I don't know how else to say it, he doesn't have any chakra." Her words didn't register with them at first, but when they did, a chill ran through everyone. Minato looked down at Naruto's gurgling little form. What? That should be impossible, right? I mean we were taught that every living thing has chakra, no matter how little, how can Naruto not have any? He asked. I don't know. I checked, double-checked, and triple-checked, then I had a Hyuga nurse take a look at him with a Byakugan. His chakra core and coils are completely empty, no matter how impossible it may seem. She sat down on a chair and heaved a tired sigh. Last night, I managed to get rid of whatever was killing his soul, but it was a close call. I managed to fix his soul right as it died. I'd thought that I managed to completely save it, but there were a few seconds where Naruto was dead. Your chakra only leaves you when you die, so Naruto must have lost his chakra then. She looked over at Kushina. I'm so sorry if I'd been faster, if I'd wasted less time. Kushina just gave her a small smile. Stop it, Tsunade. You saved Naruto's life. She looked down at him, brushing a hand over his blonde hair. I'll admit, I'm sad that he can't use chakra, but him just so thankful that he's alive. Losing his chakra seems like a small price to pay. A small tear slipped down her cheek. If anyone's to blame, it's me. I lost my Anbu guard and went out alone, after all. Jiraiya came over and put a hand on her shoulder. Come on now, neither of you are to blame for this. If anyone is, it's the spooky bastard that attacked you. Minato nodded. Sensei's right, and we'll do everything we can to find that thing and teach it a lesson. There was a knock on the door, and after being called in, an Anbu with a monkey mask stepped inside. Hokage-sama, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the council members are asking for a meeting to discuss what happened. The groan escaped Minato's mouth, and Kushina giggled. Go ahead Minato, we'll be here. At least until when can I go home, Tsunade? Well, I know how much you hate the hospital, but I want to keep you two here for a few days, just to make sure everything's alright. Tsunade said, before giving Kushina a glare when the Redeed looked ready to argue. Kushina frowned and pouted. Fine, we'll stay for a while. Jiraiya stretched as he headed toward the window. Well, alright then, since everyone's going about their business, I should probably get back to mine. He then shivered as he felt two sets of eyes start burning holes in his head. Spying or research? Kushina asked with a deadly tone to her voice. Spying, of course. Come on, what do you take me for? Jiraiya asked. Tsunade gave him a deadpan look. You don't want us to answer that question. After watching a grumbling Jiraiya jump out the window, Kushina kissed Naruto's head and looked down into his bright blue eyes. Are you excited to go home? I know I am. She cooed to him, smiling as Naruto tried to grip her red locks. You know what? Even if you can't use chakra, I know you'll go amazing things, my little maelstrom. 8 years later, Uzumaki compound. Ha! Came Naruto's cry, throwing a punch at his father. The blonde had grown normally over the past 8 years, something that his parents were grateful for. His hair had grown a bit longer, now hanging over his forehead, and he was wearing a blue t-shirt with an orange spiral on it and black shorts with blue shinobi sandals. He threw another punch, hitting Minato's hand, before transitioning into a side kick. However, just after the kick hit, Minato grabbed his foot and gave it a light shove, making Naruto fall back. Wahey. As he fell back, Minato stood up and offered a hand. Remember Naruto, draw your leg back right after the kick connects. Otherwise your opponent will do that. He always enjoyed these spars with Naruto, and even if he didn't have chakra, they wanted him to be able to defend himself. Naruto grumbled, but grabbed his father's hand. Yeah, I know 2 cents so, are we gonna go again? Minato let out a chuckle. Not this time, it's almost time for lunch, and we don't want Ka-san mad at us for letting our food get cold. He said with a shiver, which Naruto matched. The two of them were currently in the courtyard of the Uzumaki clan's Konoha compound. It was traditionally designed like the Hyugas, though nowhere near as big. It just had the main house with a few smaller guest houses. It was originally meant as a house for visiting Uzumaki back in the days when Yuzushi Agakure was around, however Kushina had moved in when she got to Konoha, with Minato joining her after they'd started dating. The two made their way into the dining room to see what looked like a miniature Kushina already sat at the table. She had the same skin, hair and eyes, but the hair was done up into a pair of twin tails. She turned to them and gave a megawatt grin, bouncing over to them and grabbing Naruto's hand. Nai-san. Come sit next to me, I want to show you something. Naruto nodded before his sister yacked him forward. Okay Yui. Stop pulling me, I'm coming. Yui Namikaze was the newest addition to the Namikaze family, and undeniable proof that when Kushina had children, bad things happened. Not that it was her fault. A long thought to be dead, shinobi showed up in the village while she was giving birth to Yui and ripped the Kyuubi out of her. This time they'd gone the whole 9 yards that they usually go to when a Jinchuriki gives birth, a sealed chamber in a secret location where nothing could go wrong. Well, almost nothing. Just after Kushina had given birth to Yui, a masked man whom Minato believed to be Madara Uchiha had appeared and taken Kushina, then unleashed the Kyuubi upon the village. Tsunade had been there and had tried to stop him, but Madara had used Yui as a shield to keep her and Minato from doing anything until he'd gotten away with Kushina. After that Minato had gone after him and Tsunade had gone to help defend the village from the angry Biju. Naruto was only 2 when the attack happened, but he had a very clear memory of catching a glimpse of the beast while he was being taken to one of the village's shelters by Shizune. His parents hadn't shared all the details with him, but apparently Minato had managed to fight off Madara while Jiraiya, Tsunade, and the Sandaime fought the Kyuubi. They'd managed to keep it more or less contained in one part of the village, but it had still caused a fuckton of damage. Then, to get rid of it, Minato was forced to use an extremely powerful seal which would cost him his life. What Minato had intended to do was split the Kyuubi in half, part going to Yui and the other part going into himself. He believed that Yui would need to control the Kyuubi someday and wanted to take half of the Kyuubi with him to keep the full Kyuubi from overwhelming her. However, this wasn't how it ended up working out. Flashback, night of the Kyuubi attack. The Shinigami was a bit annoyed at the moment. He had a very busy schedule: collect the souls of the dead, watch the barrier sealing this world off from the other one. Well, actually that was it, but it was a very time-consuming job. Not to mention there was a hollow running around doing who knows what in all the years since the Soul King had created him. He'd never once allowed a hollow to get past him, then this one somehow shows up. Thankfully it seemed to just be biding its time right now, which was good because it gave him enough time to find the little fucker. Anyway, the Shinigami was annoyed because his work had gotten interrupted by the humans who summoned him. Apparently this human had developed a seal that summoned him to seal things away, and he was being asked to seal half a Biju into a newborn and half into the man who summoned him. Well, he'd done stranger things. He cracked his fingers and prepared to work before something caught his attention. The woman, her Riatsu, was much higher than it should be. The only reason it would be was if she'd been in contact with a spiritual being. He certainly hadn't been the one, so who? Ah, the hollow. Speaking of hollows, what was that he was sensing from the village? It was definitely a hollow, but it felt strange. The Shinigami focused on it, and before his eyes appeared a toddler, crying in the arms of an older girl. Well, that was unexpected then. The more he focused on this boy, examining his Riatsu, the more interested the Shinigami became. He was certainly an interesting case. It looked like his soul had completely hollow-feed, but was somehow resuscitated, creating a living hollow. It would appear that the woman was attacked by a hollow, with the child being killed in some fashion, but brought back to life with a hollow-feed soul. Interesting. Though this would require a bit of observation. The boy was the first of his kind after all. If he couldn't control his powers, then he'd become a big problem. Of course, if he could learn to control it, then he could be an incredibly valuable asset. He was getting off track before any of that. He needed to get this contract sorted out. Speaking of, maybe he could use this to his advantage. If he let the boy's family live, then he could already have a debt to hold over him if he ever needed something from the boy. Plus, he would be lying if he felt like he didn't owe the woman something. He'd allowed a hollow to slip past him, by accident or not didn't matter, and this woman was attacked as a result. Plus she must have made it fire the Zero, which alerted the Shinigami to its presence. Count yourselves lucky, humans, none of you are dying today, he thought to himself. Now, let's take the yang portion and put it in the baby, then we'll take the yin portion and put it in the woman. Oh right, she's dying, well, let's just give her a little more life energy. Normally he wasn't allowed to do his own thing like this, but he felt he'd earned a little right to bend the rules. He finished by snapping his fingers and fixing the holes in their chests from Kyuubi's claw. The Shinigami took a few minutes to admire his work before taking one last look at Naruto's Riatsu and fading away, the sealing contract complete. Meanwhile, Minato now knelt by Yui's crib, an unconscious Kushina next to him, and a look of utter confusion on his face. The Shinigami had seemed like it was ready to do its thing, then it just stopped, looked around and thought for a while. Next thing Minato knew, half the Kyuubi was in Yui, the other half was back in Kushina, and he was still alive. He honestly had no idea what just happened. Had someone interfered with the sealing? Minato quickly looked over both Yui and Kushina. Yui was fine, and her seal was working perfectly. Kushina was a little worse for wear, but it looked like her seal was fine as well. What the hell happened? Flashback end. Minato still had no idea what had happened that night. He thought maybe the seal had an error that made it function differently than intended, but nope. The formula was completely correct. It should have sealed half into Yui and half into himself, taking part of the Kyuubi with him when Minato died. Instead, Kushina had gotten the other half, and the both of them were alive. Minato wasn't usually one to look a gift horse in the mouth, but he knew there was a reason, he just couldn't think of what it might be. I should just forget about it. Whatever happened, I should be grateful. Kushina and I are alive, and so are our kids. Speaking of, Yui seemed to be staring at him with suspicion. "To-chan, I wanna show Nai-san first," she said with a little pout. Oh, right. She wanted to show Naruto something. Alright, I'll go help Kas and bring lunch out. He headed into the kitchen, seeing Kushina stirring a pot of ramen. "You know, if we eat too much ramen we'll be in trouble." Kushina turned and gave him a smirk. "Sacrilege. Nothing bad can happen from enjoying the food of the gods. We don't even have it that much, at least. This is the first time this week." "Right, well I suppose we shouldn't keep the kids waiting. You know how Yui gets when she has to sit still for too long." Sure, I'll get the bowls and chopsticks, would you bring the pot? The two of them gathered everything up and headed back into the dining room. As they walked in, they saw something that they certainly weren't expecting. Naruto and Yui were watching as a small golden chain stood straight up in Yui's hand. Yui looked like she was concentrating hard, but when she noticed Minato and Kushina, she quickly turned and beamed at them, "Ka-chan, Tu-chan, look. I can make the chains too." She dayed happily, before the chain dissipated due to Yui losing focus. A bright grin blossomed on Kushina's face as well as she put the bowls on the table and sat on Yui's other side. "That's great, Yui. You even figured out how to make them appear all on your own." At Yui's nod, Kushina gave her a hug. "You're a natural. I'll have to teach you how to use those sometime." Kushina had been worried that the chains would die with her, since they were rare even among the Uzumaki clan. But it looked like she didn't have to worry anymore. However, the smile dropped a bit as she looked over to Naruto. He was smiling. It was a big grin that went from ear to ear, filled with happiness. It was also completely fake. Minato and Kushina had told Naruto about his condition a few years prior. They'd originally wanted to wait, but after Naruto got his heart set on going to the academy, they decided that waiting longer would just be cruel. It was a hard thing to do, but at least it was out of the way now. 3 years prior midday, Minato leaned back against his desk, one hand on his head and the other drumming against his desk. He was having a bit of a dilemma and had asked his predecessor, Hiruzen Sarutobi, to help him work it out. "I mean, is there any way that Naruto could become a shinobi without chakra?" "Minato, I know Naruto has his heart set on it, but it just won't work out." The elderly shinobi told Minato with a stern look. "You don't know that, there have been special cases where kids haven't been able to properly mold chakra and still been made shinobi. Naruto could still work his way through the academy." Hiruzen shook his head. "In all those cases those kids have been able to at least use chakra to enhance their physical abilities and activate items which require chakra to use. I know Naruto is a strong child, but he doesn't have any chakra to work with. Not only that, but think of his safety." At Minato's raised eyebrow, Hiruzen elaborated, "Even a genin could beat highly trained opponent who can't use chakra. Naruto just wouldn't be able to keep up with a shinobi's strength and speed. He'd be a sitting duck on the battlefield and get himself killed." Minato looked down at his desk. "I know that it's just, when he looks at me with those bright eyes, telling me he's going to be the strongest ninja in the world, I just want to help him get there." Hiruzen placed a hand on Minato's shoulder, a fatherly smile on his face. "That's because you're a good father, Minato. You believe in your son and you want him to succeed in whatever he wants to do, but part of being a parent is telling your children the truth. Even if it hurts." The office was quiet for a few minutes before Minato let out a long-suffering sigh. "Alright, I get it, thanks, Hiruzen-sama." He turned and looked out the window. He really hated having to do this, but the old man was right. "I think I'm going to take the rest of the day off. Naruto will probably need some family time after this." Hiruzen nodded. "Go ahead, I'll finish up here." He gave a joking smile. "Just don't make a habit out of it. I retired to get away from the paperwork." "So, what should we have for dinner, Naruto?" Kushina asked her son with a smile. "And don't say ramen, we already had it yesterday." She was in the living room of the Uzumaki estate, sitting on the couch, with her 2 children on the floor. They were both drawing in some coloring book she'd gotten them. Well, Naruto was still coloring. Yui looked like she was ready for a nap. Naruto shrugged. "I don't know, maybe pork chops then," he said, before looking up at Kushina questioningly. "Hey, Ka-san. Can you teach me how to make those chains?" Kushina blinked in surprise, not expecting that. I don't know, Naruto, it's not really something you can teach, either you're born with it or you're not," she said, trying to skirt around the fact that he didn't have any chakra. She hated hiding it from him. Maybe it was time for she and Minato to come clean. He looked like he wanted to say something else before something caught his attention. "2 cents home." He got up off the floor and raced toward the front door. Kushina gave a little huff and watched him go. She had no idea how he did that. Naruto was somehow able to tell when people were getting near him before anyone else. Obviously he wasn't a censor. Kushina was brought out of her thoughts by Naruto coming back into the room with Minato, trying and failing to whisper conspiratorially, "2-san, help me convince Ka-san that we should have ramen again." Minato let out a chuckle. "Careful, Naruto. You wouldn't want Ka-san to get the boken out, right?" His smile widened as Naruto shivered before it dropped a bit. "Hey Naruto, it looks like Yui is pretty wiped out. Would you put her crayons and coloring book away while Ka-san and I take her to her room?" Kushina raised an eyebrow as Naruto nodded, gathering up his sister's crayons. Minato picked Yui up off the floor and gestured to Kushina to follow him, which she did, though she was a bit confused. Once they got to Yui's room, Kushina waited outside while Minato set her on her futon and headed out, sliding the door closed. Minato turned to her and gave her a somber look. "I think we should tell Naruto about his chakra." "What? I thought we were going to wait," she exclaimed, not liking that this came out of nowhere. I just got to thinking about it today. I don't want to take away his dreams any more than you do, but the longer we wait the worse it's going to be on him. We have to tell him sometime, and I think that getting it out of the way as soon as we can is the best option. But it'll crush him. We wanted to wait until he was older so he'd understand, and he's only 5. Just imagine how upset this will make him. Minato looked her in the eye. Imagine how upset he'll be when he gets old enough to enter the academy and learns then. We let him wait until just before he got started and then just rip it all away from him. That would be even worse. He took Kushina's hand. I know you don't want to hurt him, but he has to be told. Kushina was silent for a minute. She started to say something a few times, but her words always died in her throat. Finally she sighed and nodded her head. Right, you're right, the longer we wait, the worse it will be. She took a few breaths to steady herself before they went back to the living room, seeing Naruto still flipping through his coloring book. Naruto, could you come here? We need to talk to you about something. She said as they both sat down on the couch, patting the spot between her and Minato. Naruto looked a bit confused, but shrugged and hopped up onto the couch with them. What's up? Minato looked down at the floor. This was going to be harder than he thought. Well, he supposed that the best thing to do was to just come out and say it. Well, it's about your chakra, you see Naru. Oh. Are you guys finally gonna start teaching me stuff? Awesome, come on, let's go outside and see if I can use mom's awesome chains. Before he could leave, Kushina stopped him. Naruto, please listen to me, it's important. Okay. The night you were born, something happened. I was a monster? Naruto asked, his eyes widening. Seeing that Kushina was struggling a bit, Minato took over. We managed to chase it off, but it did something to you while you were still inside your Kasan. We still don't fully understand how, but it was trying to kill your soul. Naruto put a hand to his chest. We had to get you out early so Tsunade could save you, and she did, but because of what it did to you, your chakra was gone. Naruto looked between the two of them, eyes holding a twinge of fear. Well, it came back right. Right. Kushina wrapped her arms around him. We're so sorry, Naruto, but your chakra is lost and it can't come back. But I can still be a ninja, can't I? He asked desperately, looking up at Minato. It broke Minato's heart to look into those pleading eyes, but he couldn't run away from this. Naruto deserved to know the absolute truth. I'm so sorry, Naruto. But it's just not possible without chakra, you would be killed. Naruto looked down at the ground. So what do I do? What can I do? Kushina hugged him closer. You can do anything else you want to. If you really want to be involved with the shinobi world, then you can join the research and development team or the Fuinjutsu Corps. You don't need chakra to learn to draw seals. Plus, don't forget that when you get older, you'll take over as head of the Uzumaki clan. You may not have chakra, but I know you'll do great at whatever you want to do. Naruto just nodded quietly, and Minato put a hand on his shoulder. Naruto, I know this is hard, and I wish that there was something we could do to give you chakra or make it possible for you to be a shinobi, or tell you that your chakra will come back someday, but we just don't know though. There is one thing we do know. He then lifted Naruto's head to look him in the eye, giving him a warm smile. Even without chakra, you're kind, you're smart, you're strong, and I know you'll do amazing things. Naruto nodded, wiping his eyes as Kushina spoke up. That's right, and no matter what you decide to do, we'll be right there beside you. We love you, Naruto, and we always will, no matter what. Okay, he said after a bit, clearly trying to hold back tears. They sat there holding him for a few minutes, little sniffles coming from him every now and then, before he wiped his eyes and looked up at Kushina. Hey Kasan, can we go to Ichiraku for dinner tonight? He asked, a small smile working its way onto his face. Kushina returned the smile. Of course we can, sweetie. Flashback end. It had seemed that Naruto took it well, all things considered. But they quickly realized that it still bothered him, and even after 2 years he still hadn't completely moved on from his dream of being a shinobi. Though he had taken Kushina's advice and decided to look into joining the Fuinjutsu Corps, they did accept civilians into their ranks, but Naruto would have to graduate from a civilian school first, which he was due to start in a few weeks. They had no doubt that he'd do fine. Naruto was very smart. In the meantime, Naruto had started learning the basics of Fuinjutsu from his parents and was a natural at it. They knew that losing his chakra was still a sore spot for Naruto, but he kept trying to play it off like he didn't care anymore. It was usually enough to fool the people who didn't know him, but his family, their close friends, and especially Yui, could tell it still hurt. Speaking of, Yui realized what her mother was looking at and turned to Naruto, a look of guilt on her face. Oh sorry Nai-san. Naruto's smile dropped, but became more genuine. It's okay Yui, you don't have to apologize, it's great that you can use the chains, and I really am happy for you. He said, and he did mean it. Naruto would admit that he'd felt jealous of Yui at first, but that had gone away a long time ago. She was the apple of his eye, and he couldn't stay jealous of her or angry with her if he tried. Minato, wanting to get everyone off the sad subject, held up a steaming hot pot of ramen. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm starving. How about we get started on cleaning this big sucker out? As Minato started dishing out the ramen and getting himself sat down, Yui turned to Kushina with strategically adorable puppy dog eyes. "Ka-chan, can we go to the park after lunch? Hinata told me her and her Ka-san would be there today." "Well, I don't see why not, but let's think about that after we eat. We can't let my amazing ramen go to waste, can we?" She asked with an eager smile, which was shared by her children. With the somber air all but completely gone, Minato finished getting everyone their bowls, and the Namikaze family got to work on demolishing as much ramen as they could. In Ohamain Park 2 hours later, Naruto had a bit of a hard time interacting with other kids. Kids from the shinobi clans were always talking about their family jutsu or the academy, which he couldn't do or go to. Civilian kids, on the other hand, always acted like they were afraid of him or something. He was the Hokage's son, but it wasn't like he'd tell his dad to execute them if they did something he didn't like. Most of the time he just played with Yui or her friends, one of whom was Hinata Hyuga. She was a nice girl, if unbelievably shy. From the moment she and Yui had met, the boisterous Riti had declared them best friends and frequently dragged the more reserved girl off on her adventures. To most people it looked like Hinata was just getting dragged around, but Kushina and Hitomi, Hinata's mother, knew that she did enjoy playing with the little Jinchuriki. Which was good because not a lot of other kids did. Unfortunately, Yui's status had been leaked the very same night the attack happened. Minato had assured the village that Yui wasn't a threat, but there were still a good number of civilians and a few shinobi who didn't believe it. They'd even gone so far as to tell their kids not to associate with Yui. Now back to the park. Naruto, Yui, and Hinata had been running around playing games for a few hours, and now the girls had decided that they wanted to play hide and seek. Yui and Hinata were currently running around the park, looking for a place to hide while Naruto counted, facing a random tree. Of course, no matter how well they hid themselves, he'd always be able to find them. He really didn't know how he did it, but he could just tell where people were. He didn't have chakra, so he must just have good instincts. Anyway, it was time to go look for Yui and Hinata. The park's main playground was right next to one of Konoha's main streets, with a few trees here and there to provide some shade. Around the edges were some benches, one of which had his and Hinata's mother sitting on it, with Hitomi carrying her second daughter, Hanabi, in her arms. A quick glance of the playground and the surrounding area confirmed that they weren't there, so he decided to head into the more forested areas. Farther back from the street was pretty much a miniature forest. The trees were thick, but the area wasn't big enough for a kid to actually get lost in, so nobody really cared. Now, if Naruto were a betting boy, he'd bet that the two girls hid in there somewhere, so into the trees he went. After walking around for a minute, he did indeed find the girls, though they weren't alone. Yui had her hands on her hips and a scowl on her face as she stared down an older boy, one with a Konoha headband on. He also had a couple other boys with him, they all appeared to be newly graduated genin. It also appeared that they were picking on his sister. Yui glared up at who Naruto assumed was the leader, while Hinata hid behind her. "Look, just leave us alone." The three of them didn't look like anything special. One wore a black hoodie and shorts, with spiky brown hair and a bandage on his nose. The second had black hair and glasses, and the last had sandy brown hair, and that was it, nothing else really. The sandy-haired one smirked. "Oh look, she thinks that since her two sends the Hokage, she can tell us what to do." Yui growled and was about to say something, no doubt an insult, but Hinata spoke up first. Please, we don't mean to be rude, but we should get back." She tried to pull Yui away back toward the playground, but one of the boys, the one with glasses, stepped around and blocked her. "Oh, I don't think so, you see, we're tired of you clan kids getting treated like you're so much better than us." He sneered as his friends closed in around the girls, "So we thought we'd teach you a lesson." However, he was interrupted as Naruto walked up and shoved him to the side. "Yui, Hinata, come on. We're going back to the playground," he said, surprisingly serious for an 8-year-old. The two were surprised to see him, but quickly walked over and got behind him. Naruto was about to leave before one of the boys shoved him a bit. "Excuse you, kid. We have some business to settle with those two, so out of the way. Unless you want us to teach you a lesson too," he said, tapping his headband. Naruto just scoffed. "Three guys that waited for a couple little girls to be alone before going to bully them. I'm shaking in my boots," he said, making them angry. "Let's go," he told the girls. "Oh, I remember you now," the one in the hoodie said, a nasty smirk on his face. "You're the Hokage's other kid, the one who can't use chakra, right?" Unfortunately, like Yui's Jinchuriki status, Naruto's lack of chakra didn't stay secret for long, thanks to Konoha's rumor mill. Thankfully nobody seemed to think anything less of him for it, aside from jackasses like these three. Though Naruto did get annoyed when people acted like him not having chakra was some kind of handicap. Naruto's eye twitched. "Yeah, that's me." The one with glasses chuckled a bit. "Oh, we're so sorry, you must have it bad enough being so useless," he said with a laugh. Naruto grit his teeth, but turned around and waved for Yui and Hinata to follow him. "If having chakra meant that I'd have to work with morons like you three, then I'm glad I don't have it." You're mad at people being stronger than you, and you decide to pick on kids instead of getting better. You're all a waste of time." With that, Naruto turned around and started back to the playground, only for one of them to put a hand on his shoulder. "Oh, you wanna see better, kid? Well, let me show you what chakra helps me do better than you." He yanked Naruto around and sent a punch into the blonde's face, sending him stumbling back. Then "Naruto, are you okay?" Hinata asked. Yui looked ready to fight, but Naruto put a hand up. "Okay, that did it." Naruto's hands balled up into fists as rage started to sweep through his young body. Though, something else accompanied it. Everyone felt a slight chill overtake them for a second, and none of them noticed as a bit of black started to creep into Naruto's sclera from the corner of his eye. "You know, it's a good thing you've got that bandage on your face," Naruto said conversationally. The boy was confused for a second before Naruto threw his own punch. He tumbled back, his friends catching him. Naruto's lips peeled back in a snarl as he charged toward them, idly sensing Yui and Hinata running back to the playground. The two girls quickly ran back and made a beeline straight for the bench their mothers were sitting on. Kushina and Hitomi quickly realized something was wrong as their daughters scrambled up to them, Yui being the first to speak. "Nai-san is in trouble." Kushina jumped up. "What? Where is he? What happened?" Hitomi also stood, putting a hand on Hinata's head as the brunette clung to her mother's kimono. "What's going on, Hinata?" Hinata looked up, a few stray tears in her eyes. A few older boys were picking on us and Naruto came and helped, but they punched him, and now they're fighting. Yui nodded, grabbing Kushina's hand and pulling her. "Come on. This way." Kushina wasted no time and following Yui and heading into the trees, ears quickly picking up on what sounded like a fight. Hitomi joined her, trying not to jostle Hanabi around too much. She activated her Byakugan, and her eyes quickly widened. "I see them, they're genin," she said, already memorizing their faces. Soon enough, they came upon the scene to find something interesting. As much as Kushina didn't want to admit it, she had expected to see the genin beating Naruto to a pulp, not him manhandling the three of them. Naruto threw a punch at one, sending him back into a tree. Then as another came up behind him, Naruto sent a back kick right into his stomach before spinning and backhanding him, sending him flying. One of them saw the two women standing there. "Oh no, run." He called to his friends as they hightailed it away. Naruto watched them run and got ready to go after them before Kushina stopped him. "Naruto." He turned around and saw her, anger still in his eyes. Then Kushina felt it, just for a second. Just for that one fleeting moment, she could have sworn that she felt the same type of pressure that monster used. Except it was coming from Naruto. However, just as quickly as it came, it was gone. Naruto's eyes widened, and Kushina could have sworn she saw something black in his eyes. "Naruto." He put a hand to his head, shaking it. "Sorry Ka-san, I didn't mean to glare at you." Kushina knelt down next to him, hands on his shoulders. It's okay, Naruto." Naruto wasn't a monster, she was sure of it, but she was also sure that she felt it, there was no mistake. "Are you okay?" Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just a little lightheaded." Yui then barreled into Naruto, squeezing him in a hug, while Hinata came up to him, blushing a bit. "Thank you for saving us," and Naruto, "No problem. I'm just glad I was able to fight them off," he said, pulling Hinata into a side hug, eliciting an eep from the girl. Hitomi smiled before something came to mind. "Actually Naruto, how did you fight them off? They were genin, and you don't look like you have a single injury." Naruto blinked a bit before looking down at himself. "I don't know, I guess I'm a better fighter than I thought," he said with a grin. Yui beamed up at him. "You're awesome, Nai-san. You beat all three of them up, good." The Hyuga matriarch gave a slight giggle and smile, with Hanabi also letting out a happy sound. "It looks like it. Well, I think we might have to cut this part-time short, Kushina," she asked, looking over to her friend. Kushina looked to be deep in thought, staring at Naruto. Hitomi touched her arm, making the redeed jump. What? Oh. Why yeah, looks like it. I think this is enough excitement for one day. Okay, you two, say goodbye to Hitomi and Hinata and let's go home," she said with a little smile. The children all said their goodbyes and they went their separate ways, but Kushina was left with a lingering worry in her head. She was certain that she sensed that Naruto was emitting the same pressure that the thing that attacked her did. Naruto's didn't feel anywhere near as bad, nor did it last for long, but it was there. Kushina kept giving Naruto glances as they walked. Maybe he wasn't completely fine after all. "No. Don't think like that. Naruto is my son, he's a perfectly normal boy. I used to be human too." Kushina stopped dead as its voice rang out in her head, eyes wide. It had said that, it used to be human. If a human somehow became a monster like that, then, "Ah-san, what's wrong?" Naruto asked. Kushina looked down at Naruto, a million thoughts running through her head. He was looking up at her with concern, and she couldn't help but feel stupid. There was no possible way that her little boy could become a creature like that. Besides, for all she knew that thing was just lying to her to scare her, she gave Naruto a warm smile. "It's nothing, sweetie, I'm just a bit out of it right now." Naruto nodded, looking like he didn't quite believe it, and they continued on their way home. Naruto would be fine, Kushina was sure of it. Chapter end. Chapter 2. The Boy with a Hollow Soul. Konoha Academy for General Education. 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Shizuka Takahashi took her job as a teacher seriously. She may not be an instructor at the Shinobi Academy, but she felt that her job was no less important. Some other teachers may tell her that she was too young to be so stiff, but she just ignored them. The shinobi may protect the village, but the civilian population was just as vital to the overall life of their home. Because of this, she strived to make sure that her students were given the best education possible so that they could go out and live a fulfilling life. Speaking of, lunchtime was about to end, and she'd better get on with her usual ritual of making sure the room was tidy. Shizuka stood up, brushing off her plain white blouse and long, ankle-length skirt, and made sure her brown hair was still neat. Despite teaching very different subjects, the room was nearly identical to one you'd find in the Shinobi Academy, except for the walls being a beige color and the diagrams being mathematical or scientific. She put on her usual smile as students started filing in from lunch, watching as they got into their seats and pulled their things out of their bags. Her class this year was a very good one. Usually teaching 15-year-olds was a hassle, but there wasn't a single troublemaker in the bunch. An empty seat caught her eye, well, at least not one that makes trouble for the class. She thought to herself, the smile turning into a frown as she looked around the class. Where is he? It was pretty clear that everyone knew who she was talking about, but nobody said anything. Well, someone has to know where he went. One girl with glasses and black hair spoke up. "We really don't, sensei. He was at lunch with us, but we didn't see him go anywhere." Shizuka sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Why did he always have to be difficult? The Noha Market District, on a rooftop. Naruto let out a grunt of exertion as he pulled himself up and sat on the edge of a building. By now his sensei would probably realize he was gone, but at least he stayed for most of the day. That counted for something. He just hoped it didn't turn into a big thing. He didn't skip class that often, once or twice a week. Okay, he had a bit of a problem, but it really wasn't his fault. Everything was just so boring. "Why yes, sensei, I would love to hear about the founding of the village for the 1000th time. Ugh, you'd think they'd at least find ways to spice it up a bit." The now 15-year-old blonde sighed to himself as he looked down at the main market street. His outward appearance hadn't changed much, aside from the normal changes that came with growing up. His face had lost a fair amount of baby fat and his hair had grown, just barely reaching the middle of his neck and hanging just above his eyes. He stood at 5'8" and had the lean build that accompanied his continued training under his father. Right now, Naruto was dressed in a pair of black shinobi pants and sandals, with a white t-shirt and blue jacket. Naruto propped his arm up on his knee and let his chin settle into his hand, watching people walk by. He closed his eyes and sat there contentedly for a few minutes, enjoying the feel of the wind on his face. Almost without thinking about it, he reached into a pocket on his pants and pulled out a rather unexpected item, a kunai. It was made out of the same dark metal as every other kunai, but its wrapping were pure black, with a single white strip interwoven into it. He'd had his kunai for a little over 10 years, and it was the very first weapon he'd ever held. His mother had nearly taken his father's head off for thinking that a real, non-blunted kunai would be an appropriate present for their son's 5th birthday, but Naruto was surprisingly careful with it. He'd started training to use it with zeal, fighting imaginary enemies and learning to throw it, with his mother begrudgingly letting him keep it after she saw he knew not to be stupid with it. While his eagerness had dampened after he'd learned about his lack of chakra, he still trained with the thing. Now, if any shinobi heard this, they'd be stunned. A standard kunai lasting for 10 years of regular use without breaking was unheard of. Hell, most didn't even last a week. Kunai were disposable weapons after all, never meant to be regularly used and maintained. Nobody quite knew how, but while his parents' and Yui's kunai wore out and broke, Naruto's single kunai still held strong and looked brand new. Even if it did suddenly snap on him, Naruto didn't really know if he could replace it. The embers of his dream of becoming a shinobi still glowed inside him, and he felt like if he ditched his first kunai, they'd go out completely. He started idly spinning the weapon on his index finger by its ring, a little habit he'd developed when he had nothing to do. He sat in silence, simply enjoying the alone time. Then, his eye twitched as something appeared behind him. "You couldn't just pretend you didn't see me?" he asked, a bit of disappointment in his voice. "Damn scarecrow." A nonchalant voice answered back, one he'd heard many times before. "Well, I would've, but the last time I did, Kushina nearly killed me." Naruto rolled his eyes and turned to see one Kakashi Haddock, dressed in his usual garb of the standard Konoha shinobi uniform, with the added mask and headband covering his Sharingan eye. "How many times does that make it this week? 3? No, only twice." Naruto answered, "I don't suppose I could convince you to just forget about this?" Kakashi shook his head. "Sorry, kid. not gonna happen. He said before walking over and sitting down beside Naruto, raising his eyebrow when he saw the kunai. You had that at school. Naruto nodded. They let you have weapons. This time it was Naruto's turn to raise an eyebrow. Of course not. He said simply. Kakashi sweat dropped. The two sat there for a second. So, get bored again. If there was one thing about school Naruto hated, it was being bored. Yep, it's a review day since we're gonna be graduating soon. Unlike the Shinobi Academy, the civilian schoolchildren graduated at 16 and after that they'd go off to find apprenticeships and jobs. The school even had businesses that were ready to hire new graduates right out the door of the school. Needless to say, Naruto had gotten a lot of offers, despite his habit of skipping school. Everyone wanted the Hokage's son as their employee, for one reason or another. Well, review days might be boring, but you should still be at school. The Fuinjutsu Corps is pretty particular about who they allow in. Even if your grades are good they won't let you in if they think you won't take it seriously. Kakashi said, and it was true. Naruto's grades might be very good, even with his skipping, but a lot of people would rather have a dedicated employee rather than one who's talented but didn't care. Naruto just shrugged, they already allowed me in. Kasen got asked to come down and help with some seal work and dragged me. They said I was amazing at it and they'd be happy to give me a spot whenever I wanted it. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. That's good, but you don't sound very happy about it. Naruto was silent for a minute, deep in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that Kakashi wasn't expecting. I don't know lately, I've been feeling like I'm just going through the motions of my life instead of actually living it. He lay back on the roof, staring up at the sky. It's like I'm missing something. Well, who knows? You could just be through that phase at Naruto's raised eyebrow. Kakashi continued, everyone goes through a phase in their teenage years where they don't know what to do with their life. I went through it, Sensei went through it, Yui's going to go through it eventually. It's natural, you'll figure it out. Kakashi said. Naruto shook his head, it's not just that nothing excites me anymore. Going to school, Fuinjutsu training, sparring with Tusan, all of it just feels hollow. Kakashi nodded, taking a second to gather his thoughts. Sounds like you don't have anything driving you. Naruto looked at him, wide-eyed, you need something to motivate you, a reason to keep going. Okay, so what would that drive be? The last time I remember having a real burning drive was when I wanted to be a shinobi. He said, reluctant to bring up those memories. Kakashi said, well, why did you want to be a shinobi in the first place? Naruto looked off to the side, I wanted to help people. It might sound stupid, but that's it. A small chuckle escaped Kakashi's lips, no, wanting to help people is an admirable goal. You just need to realize that you can still do that without being a shinobi. I know that, I just don't know how. Naruto grumbled. Kakashi nodded, well, you're still young. You still have plenty of time to figure it out and you know you've got a lot of people behind you, always ready to help out, myself included. The two sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes before Naruto got up and onto his feet, thanks Kakashi. I think I'm gonna head off and find someplace quiet to clear my head. The markets are a little too noisy. Just before he started on his way back down, he felt Kakashi grip his shoulder and Naruto turned to find him giving his trademark eye smile, sure, but first you're going back to school. Don't think this little heart-to-heart made me forget. Damn it. Naruto Uzumaki, why must we keep doing this? Shizuka asked as they sat in her office. The school day had ended and Naruto had reluctantly returned to school at Kakashi's insistence. Because people keep finding me, Naruto grumbled under his breath. Unfortunately it wasn't quiet enough as his sensei narrowed her eyes. Uzumaki-san, I know that school isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but being here is important. You need to take this seriously and stay the entire day. Naruto leaned back in the chair with an exasperated sigh, what's the point? My grades are good and I already have a job lined up, so what does it matter if I skip? That's the big purpose of school, right? Shizuka gave a hesitant nod, that's the main purpose, but there's one facet that I think you're severely lacking in. Social interaction. Naruto raised an eyebrow, I'm not a socially awkward gremlin. I get out, I talk to people, I believe that my track record with the ladies will also attest to that. I am quite the handsome devil if I say so myself, granted most of them just wanted to date the Hokage's son for clout and that's why he didn't go out with a lot of them. His sensei rolled her eyes, I mean making friends. Then it was time for Naruto to roll his own eyes, don't give me that. You can't just be alone all the time, you need to make friends and interact. Haven't we been over this before? Naruto asked, standing up and pacing, every time I try to talk to people, it always goes to so how did you lose your chakra? What's it like not having chakra? Man, it must suck. Yeah, well I'm pretty much over it really. I don't think I'd ever get over something like that. He said, anger entering his voice, it's infuriating. But hey, I could go hang out with the people that only just see me as Hokage-sama's son, I bet they've got a laundry list of things they need my help with. Suddenly, Naruto's breath hitched and he closed his eyes, putting a hand to his head as a slight chill was felt in the room. Shizuka listened with concern. Naruto may be more mature than the average teen, but he still had his emotional outbursts. "Uzumaki-san, are you alright?" she asked, seeing him grab his head. Naruto was silent before nodding. Yeah, I'm fine." He took a deep breath, turning and giving his sensei a smile. "Sorry for going off like that. I don't know what came over me." Shizuka gave him a smile. "It's alright, I'm always here if you need to get something off your chest. But for now, I think we're done." Her smile then turned more concerned. "Just promise me you'll try to make friends. You never know when you'll come across a good one, but it'll never happen if you don't try." The blonde nodded. "Alright, sensei. I'll see you tomorrow," he said as he grabbed his bag, then headed out of the office and out the door toward home. That was close. If he hadn't caught it in time, then his sensei might have noticed his eyes changing. Despite his mother's best attempts to keep him from realizing, Naruto had figured out that there was some kind of something inside him. It usually just came out when he was angry, but for some reason it was getting harder to keep down. Thankfully nobody seemed to be able to sense it, aside from his mother, so if nobody saw his eyes turn black, then nobody knew. He'd originally wanted to tell his parents, but had decided to keep it to himself until he knew what it was and what he could do with it. At least, that had been the plan. However, it was becoming clearer and clearer to Naruto that whatever it was just didn't want to cooperate. Not only that, but his mother was on to him. Whenever he came back to the house after going on a late-night run to do something with his power, she'd give him this look. It was like she knew what he was really doing and was begging him to stop. Well, she might just get her wish no matter what he did. He couldn't make anything happen, other than maybe a slight increase in his physical skills and black creeping into his eye. Well, that wasn't exactly true. Lately he'd been feeling a reaction from it. Well, whatever. As he walked through the streets toward his home, he couldn't help but notice the looks he received. Mostly it was just an acknowledging glance. Those looks were the most plentiful. Next were the few happy smiles and cheery waves from the people who lived or worked nearby, which he returned. The nice old lady who owned a bakery down the street that Yui always went to, the academy's cleanup crew on their way to work, and a few other people. Then there were the other looks, people giving him calculating stares, internally debating on how best to approach him for whatever reason, probably not because they actually wanted to get to know him. Naruto shook his head. He had to stop thinking like that. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he knew that Shizuka-sensei was right. He could do with some actual friends his own age. I'll work on it later, he thought to himself as he reached the Namikaze Uzumaki family home. He strolled through the gates and into the main house, taking off his jacket and shoes, only to be greeted by the blade of a bokken slamming down on his head with a loud crack, sending Naruto to the floor. "Ow. What the hell?" Naruto said as he rolled around on the floor in pain, then he looked up to see his mother standing there, bokken in hand, and giving him the patented mom look. Kushina gave a wry smile and leaned the wooden instrument of parental wrath on her shoulder. "Don't think you'll be getting out of skipping school without any punishment." Her smile widened at Naruto's groan. "Don't give me that, you knew you weren't off the hook, right?" Naruto sighed and stood, looking off to the side. "Yeah, sorry," he said, his shoulders drooping as his eyes turned to the floor. At his apology, Kushina's smile dropped and she gave him a more comforting look. "I know you're having a rough patch in your life right now, but you'll find your way until then. You just have to keep moving forward, now and always. Especially since you'll be a clan head when you get older, Naruto Uzumaki." That was another thing that he had to get used to, being an Uzumaki. Well, his name being Uzumaki at least. A few months ago, his mother had made his status as heir to the Uzumaki official, thus making Uzumaki his primary family name. He'd been a bit hesitant about taking the position, but his mother had been sure he'd do great, so Naruto had agreed. Naruto gave his mother a raised eyebrow. "Are you really sure I'm the best for the job? I mean, I'm glad you think I can do it, but will I really be able to lead a shinobi clan? Yui would be the better choice." At this, another voice made itself known, this one belonging to Yui, who'd walked up to them after she'd heard the familiar crack of a bokken across someone's head. "Hey, don't go pawning it off on me. I can't stand all that political stuff, and even if I could, I just can't wrap my head around it," she said, joining her mother and brother. Yui had also grown and changed over the years. The 13-year-old girl's hair had grown longer, reaching her shoulder blades, but it stayed in their twintails. She was currently wearing her usual outfit of an orange tank top over a short-sleeved mesh undershirt with a black skirt, red shorts underneath, and black sandals. Her outfit was completed by a shuriken pouch on her belt and a kunai case strapped to her thigh. A small smirk appeared on Naruto's face. "Yeah, I guess you're right," he said, walking past Yui and toward his room. "My dear, sweet Amado's simple mind just isn't suited for the strenuous thinking required for politics." Yui put her hands on her hips as Naruto walked past, a proud smile on her face. "That's right." "Huh?" she said, suddenly realizing what Naruto had said. "Hey, wait a minute. Did you just call me stupid?" she asked, sprinting after her brother, leaving Kushina standing there. Kushina shook her head with a smile as she heard them race through the house, Yui's angry yells turning to laughter as their chase turned into a game of tag. Truth be told, when Yui had started the academy, she'd been worried it would drive a wedge between the two, what with Naruto still holding a desire to be a shinobi. But thankfully, no such thing happened. Admittedly, everyone was still hesitant to talk about shinobi matters and chakra with Naruto around, but the two trained together and Naruto was even Yui's #1 source of advice and help with homework. As the two calmed down and went about their home business, Yui heading to the dojo to train and Naruto going to his room to do whatever, Kushina sighed and headed to the Fuinjutsu study, intending to work on a project the Fuinjutsu Corps had asked for her help on. As she worked, she couldn't help but be painfully aware of something, Naruto. Even from here, she could feel the pressure he was emitting. It was nowhere near the level of the thing she fought, but it was noticeable and getting stronger. Kushina was no fool, she knew that Naruto was aware of it and he was trying to control it. On one hand, if he did learn to control it, then he might be able to realize his dream and become a shinobi, something she knew he still wanted. On the other hand, I used to be human too. That thing's words stuck with her, worming their way into her mind whenever she thought about this. What if using this power would change Naruto? What if he did end up becoming a monster, unable to control himself? Kushina shook her head, thinking about it wouldn't help anything. As much as she hated it, she just didn't know what would happen if Naruto continued trying to use his power. She'd probably have to have a talk with him sometime, at least that way they could stop this dance where both of them knew what was going on but refused to acknowledge it. Speak of the devil, a knock on the door sounded, come in. It opened and Naruto stood there, still with his jacket on, hey Kasan, I'm heading out on a run, be back soon. Well, no time like the present, she supposed, hold on Naruto, can you come in here for a second? She watched as Naruto seemed to stiffen up but headed into the study, shutting the door and standing in front of the desk. The two sat there in silence, with Kushina not quite sure how to start the conversation. She tried several times, but nothing came out, thankfully Naruto couldn't hold his silence. Ugh, damn it, this is too painful, it's about this, he said, concentrating a bit and making black start to creep into his eye, right? He asked as the room's temperature dropped a bit. Kushina flinched, staring at the black streak slowly bleeding into his sclera, why yes, it's about that. She got up from the desk and walked around, Naruto, I'm worried about you, whatever this is, we don't know what it'll do to you. You need to stop feeding it. Naruto raised an eyebrow, feeding it. Kasan, I don't know what. Don't lie to me, Naruto Uzumaki. She interrupted, making Naruto flinch, I know you still want to be a shinobi, but this isn't the way. Naruto narrowed his eyes and looked to the floor in thought, how do you know? How held a hand over his eye, for all we know, this could be a good thing. I mean, that thing wanted to kill me, right? Well, it failed, I'm alive, and I have this power whether we want to acknowledge it or not. While his parents told him the basics of what happened when they told him about his chakra, it wasn't until a year ago that he'd gotten the entire story. His parents had been worried that whatever it was would come back for him and they wanted him to be aware of it, so they spared no detail. Kushina shook her head and put her hands on his shoulders, exactly. We don't know what it does, it could hurt you, it could kill you, it could turn me into a monster. Kushina's words got caught in her throat, that's what the big issue is, right? You don't want me to turn into a rampaging, bloodthirsty killer. Kushina squeezed his shoulders, silent, before a sigh escaped her lips, yes, that's what I'm most afraid of. That thing told me that it used to be human, whether it was lying or not, it still did something to you. She stood there, removing her hands and pinching the bridge of her nose, I just want you to be safe. I'll be fine, Kasan. You know that I'll be careful. Naruto said, turning around to leave. Naruto, you need to take this seriously. You can't keep trying to use it. Naruto spun around, why the hell not? He asked loudly, the black creeping in further and starting to turn his iris yellow, it's my power, so why shouldn't I use it? I'm so close to figuring it out, I can feel it. His only answer was silence, and he looked to see that Kushina had backed away a couple steps. Though that wasn't what struck him, that was the look of fear in his mother's eyes. Her breathing had quickened, her eyes were wide and completely consumed by fear. Naruto stopped, closed his eyes, and took slow, deep breaths. After a minute, he felt his power recede and looked at Kushina, his eyes back to normal, sorry I didn't mean to scare you. Kushina took her own minute to calm down, it's alright. She said, before moving over and hugging Naruto, I'm not scared of you, I'm scared for you. The hug was tense, but only for a few minutes as Kushina relaxed. She broke the hug and looked Naruto in his eyes, promise me you'll stop please. Seeing Naruto's stubborn look about to return, she spoke again, I don't want to risk losing you, the risks are too great. Naruto stood in silence for a minute before nodding, Kasan, I know we don't know what it can do, but I just feel like I have to do this, I mean, could you honestly just let this go if you were me? His mother looked down at the floor, deep in thought, before looking back up at him. I don't know, but there's one thing I do know, this isn't chakra, and just because of that it might be impossible to stop. Naruto raised an eyebrow, what do you mean? Do you remember when Yui first tapped into the Kyuubi's chakra? Naruto's eyes widened and he nodded. That hadn't been a pleasant experience for anyone. A small group of civilians who couldn't separate Yui from the beast she contained had decided to do something about her. It was only a small group of them, but this was back when Yui had just started the academy and didn't have a lot of experience defending herself. Plus without any chakra, Naruto couldn't take on that many adults at once. They'd managed to catch her while she and Naruto were on their way to the candy shop. It was the first time Yui had ever felt afraid for her life, and in a moment of desperation, Kyuubi responded. Thankfully they were close to the house, so their parents got to them quickly and stopped Yui before she actually killed any of them, using Kushina's chains and a seal Minato had prepared for just such an occasion. Truth be told, Naruto was actually afraid himself. He'd called out to Yui to try and stop her, but when she turned to him, all he'd seen were the eyes of an enraged beast out for blood. Kushina continued, your two-san and I stopped her and kept her from killing anyone, but we could only do it since we knew how to suppress Kyuubi's chakra and calm Yui. She made sure Naruto was paying attention before continuing, this power of yours, we know nothing about it. My chains didn't suppress that creature's power at all, and without knowing how it works, we can't design a seal to stop it. She grit her teeth and shook a bit. If you really went out of control, and if we couldn't stop you then, someone would have to put me down, Naruto said with a solemn tone. He actually hadn't thought about it that way. Well, he certainly hoped he wouldn't become a rampaging monster. His mother did bring up good points. Naruto struggled with himself for a minute before sighing in defeat, alright I promise. Stupid power wouldn't even work for me anyway, he said in an attempt to lighten the mood. It apparently worked as Kushina couldn't help but let out a little chuckle, good. She let go of Naruto and brightened up, so, how about we forget all this and you help me with dinner? Kushina asked, I was thinking about making some of my secret recipe red hot habanero spicy curry. Naruto perked up almost immediately. He loved ramen as much as the rest of the family, but there was something about the curry she made that he couldn't get enough of. His face split into a grin and he started toward the kitchen, well don't mind if I do. Hey Raspberry, get over here and help with dinner. He yelled to his sister. I'm training, and don't call me that, Lemonhead. Yui's voice yelled from the dojo, responding with her own nickname for her brother. Ah-sen's making her special curry. Naruto responded, and just like that Kushina could hear Yui scrambling toward the kitchen and tripping over herself, stopping at the door to the study with a big grin of her own. Come on, Ka-san. What are you waiting for? She asked as she grabbed Kushina's hand and dragged her to the kitchen. Kushina couldn't help but laugh at her kids' antics, the somber atmosphere shattered by their love for her cooking. Alright. Quit pulling on me, I'm coming. After they'd gotten to the kitchen and were about to get started, they heard the front door open, and soon enough Minato poked his head in, the both of you are helping your Ka-san with dinner. This can only mean one thing, he said with a smirk, these two only got this into helping when Kushina made her special curry. Yui nodded and pointed at him, yup, and you're being conscripted to help, now get in here. Minato chuckled and put his hands up in defense, I was going to. No need to get so aggressive, if only you two were this dedicated to school. Naruto just shrugged, school is not an exceedingly delicious dish with a pleasurable burn. Well you've got me there. Minato said with a sweat drop. Kushina just smiled as the family interacted. It was times like this that made her remember how lucky they all were and how much she should cherish these moments. With Naruto promising to stop messing with his power, it seemed like everything was going to be fine. If only they knew what awaited them in the near future. 4 days later, Naruto sat in his desk at the civilian academy, bored out of his skull, while Shizuka-sensei wrapped up the day's lessons. Remember everyone, 1 week from now our class camping trip starts. If you want to go then be sure to have the permission slip signed and into me before next Friday, class dismissed. With that, everyone quickly gathered up all their things and headed out, with Shizuka giving Naruto a pointed look as he left. I hope you'll come on the trip, Uzumaki-san. It'll be a good opportunity for you to work on what we discussed a while ago. Naruto gave a shrug and a small smile, maybe sensei, a whole week out in the wilderness might be fun, but I'll have to think about it. With that, he headed out, ignoring the surprised look some of his classmates shot him. He'd actually forced himself to stay at school all day for the last few days. Mostly because he didn't want to risk getting grounded after his parents had announced that they were having a little party for him and Yui. It wasn't going to be much, just their friends coming over to celebrate Yui becoming a genin, which was pretty much assured with how well she was doing, and Naruto being accepted into the Fuinjutsu Corps. As he headed outside, he heard whispering and odd voices, with a reason for them soon becoming clear to him. Standing at the academy gate was his father, coat and all. Naruto grinned and jogged over, hey Two-san, aren't you supposed to be working? Minato returned the smile, well, if I worked as late as I normally do then I'd miss the party. so I figured I'd come grab you and your sister and we could all head home together. Alright then, let's head out. Don't wanna keep Raspberry waiting, Naruto said with a smirk as they started toward the Shinobi Academy. A chuckle escaped his father's lips. You got it, Lemonhead. Naruto just have him a dry look before flicking his eyes to Minato's own blonde locks. Oh, right. The father and son shared a laugh and continued on until they reached the Shinobi Academy, with Yui sprinting over to them, dragging Hinata with her. Once she got up to them, she was practically vibrating with excitement, a brand new Konoha hit tied around her arm. Hinata also wore one, which was tied around her neck. Tucson, Hinata's family had an important meeting come up and they're gonna celebrate her making genin tomorrow, so can she come to our party tonight? Minato nodded. If her family is okay with it, then I don't see why not. He said before turning to the brunette, we'd be happy to have you, Hinata. Thank you, Hokage-sama. She shy girl said with her own small smile. Naruto walked up to them and threw his arm around Yui's shoulder. The more the merrier, just as long as you don't mind being stuck with this one. However, he was caught off guard as a puff of smoke appeared around his sister, and when it cleared, his arm was wrapped around Hinata instead, with her looking just as surprised as him. Naruto looked over to see Yui standing where Hinata just was. Ah, Kawarimi. See how rude she is, Hinata? He asked the girl, who finally seemed to realize where she was. Hinata stared at him for a second, before blushing a bit as a small smile appeared. It's alright, I've gotten used to it over the years. Inwardly, Hinata was a bit miffed at Yui's little move there. Ever since she told the Reed about her crush on Naruto, Yui had been adamant about doing everything in her power to help them get together. Not that Hinata wasn't happy that Yui was alright with her crush, but she'd rather she be allowed to take it at her own pace. Although, it was thanks to Yui and her brash nature that she'd stopped stuttering and fainting all the time, so she should probably thank her. Minato shook his head at their antics. If that's everything then let's head off, we wouldn't want to be late, would we? 1 hour later, within an hour, the little party was in full swing. The group was going to head straight to the compound before Hinata had requested a visit to the Hyuga estate to pick up Hanabi. No doubt the 8-year-old was bored out of her skull and Hinata felt bad about leaving her little sister out. Of course nobody had any problems with this, so they took a slight detour and grabbed the little Hyuga before getting back on track. Once they'd arrived, Kushina had wasted no time in greeting everyone and ushering them out to the garden where everyone else was already hanging out. In addition to the Namikaze family, Jiraiya, Tsunade and Hiruzen were there, along with Kakashi and Shizune. Hiruzen had also brought along his grandson, Konohamaru. Naruto had never met him, but clearly Yui had, as the young boy ran right up to her with a call of a neki. Female equivalent to a Nikki. It's not often used, at least that I've seen, so I say this to avoid confusion. Clearly he looked up to Yui, and after being introduced to Naruto, he quickly took to calling him a Nikki. Naruto didn't mind, the kid seemed nice. At the moment, Naruto was sitting at one of the tables around the garden in the company of the Elemental Nation's most infamous erotic writer. So, brought your little admirer, did you? Planning on making a move tonight? He asked with a grin. Could it be that my influence on you is finally bearing fruit? Naruto shook his head with a laugh, idly spinning his kunai by its tip on the table. Calm down, Iro-sanin, Hinata's just here for the party. He glanced over to see his mother chatting with Tsunade. Also, are you sure you want to mention influencing me near Kasan and Basan? Jiraiya shrugged. Hey, it's not like I'm letting you read my books or taking you on my research trips to the hot springs. Despite my attempts to invite you along, you can run from Kasan, I can't. If she so much as thinks I'm reading one of your books or doing research with you, she'll beat me like a training dummy. Naruto said, shivering at the thought of what Kushina would do if she found out he was following in Jiraiya's footsteps. Fair enough, Jiraiya muttered. He was a Sannin, and even he barely made it out with his life when Kushina was angry at him, so I heard that the Fuinjutsu Corps accepted you and right away after seeing what you could do. Pretty impressive. I know their current captain, and he's not easily impressed. Naruto gave his own shrug. I just drew a few seals to help Kasan with the one she was designing for them. It wasn't that much. Then another voice joined their conversation, this one belonging to the Sandaime. Don't sell yourself short, Naruto. The elderly shinobi said with a grandfatherly smile as he sat at their table. Since stepping down as Hokage, the old man had taken to wearing the outfit he once did when he was the Sannin sensei. I saw the seals you made, they may have only been pieces of a bigger array, but they were some very well crafted pieces. You do the Uzumaki proud, don't ever let yourself think any different. Naruto shifted a bit in his seat. Thanks, Jiji, he said, tapping the table with his kunai. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, sensing that something was off. Something on your mind, kid? Naruto just shook his head, but the Sannin just stared at him. Come on, we know you too well for you to fool us with that. Now what's eating you? It's nothing, really. I already talked with Kakashi about it. I just feel like I don't have anything driving me. I mean, going into the Fuinjutsu Corps was more Kasan's idea, and I don't think I'd be a very good clan head. I just don't know what to do. Hiruzen hummed. Ah, I see. Well, you aren't the first in this predicament. he said, gaining Naruto's attention. There have been other children from shinobi clans who felt this way after not being able to become shinobi. Unfortunately, I can't give you the solution you're looking for, it's something only you can find, and that's exactly what you'll have to do, find it. At Naruto's slightly confused look, Jiraiya elaborated, allow me to decipher sensei's aged wisdom. He ignored the miffed look from the old man, go out and do stuff, paint, learn to play an instrument, try sports, learn to cook, find something to be passionate about. You may not be able to become a shinobi, but you can be anything else in the world. Who knows? You might stumble across something that you have more passion for than you ever did for being a shinobi. But nothing will change if you just sit there and let things happen. Naruto thought for a minute, and maybe you've got a point. Naruto spent the rest of the party moving around the gardens, chatting with everyone and seeing what kind of trouble everyone was getting into. Tsunade was already into the sake, with Shizune on hand to make sure she didn't get completely hammered. It was tough going, but it looked like she had it covered. Kakashi, Minato, Hiruzen and Kushina were all talking about village matters, and Yui was off playing ninja with Konohamaru and Hanabi. Naruto himself was sitting off to the side, intent on enjoying a hot bowl of ramen. He was about to tuck in when Hinata came up, her own bowl in her hands. Sorry to interrupt, but can I join you? It can get pretty lonely eating by yourself. Naruto just gave a small smile, you've got a point, well who am I to refuse such a kind offer? He said, gesturing to the seat across from him. It was a bit quiet at first, but soon enough they fell into a nice conversation. It was mostly about what the Genin test was like and whose teams Hinata hoped to be on. Hinata took a few deep breaths, it was beginning to look like the perfect opportunity. The two of them were more or less alone, and Hinata was finally confident enough to tell him about her feelings. Now that she was a genin, she wouldn't have as much free time, so if she was going to confess her feelings, then it had to be now. Naruto, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. Naruto raised an eyebrow and listened, well, for a long time now, I just want you to know that dang it, why is it so hard to say? Hinata asked herself. Thankfully she didn't have to keep struggling as Naruto spoke, I know. Hinata's gaze snapped to meet his, her eyes wide. Naruto couldn't help but let out a little chuckle, I've had it figured out for a while. The blushing and fainting whenever you got near me kinda clued me in. Hinata stared for a second before red started to creep into her face, consuming the entire thing in a red glow. Hinata started to sway, but Naruto jumped over and gave her a gentle shake. Hinata, come on, stay with me. The brunette managed to fight her way back from the brink of fainting, the blush receding a bit. Sorry, she inwardly cursed herself for almost fainting. She hadn't done that in so long, and now of all times was when it came back. Well, at least him knowing about her crush made it easier, and now it was time to move on to the second part of a confession. So, would you want to go out on a date with me sometime? She forced herself to ask. Naruto took a minute to think. He wouldn't be opposed to going out with Hinata, she was a sweet girl, clearly didn't have a mean bone in her body, plus since she was the Hyuga heiress he didn't have to worry about her only wanting to date him because he was the Hokage's son. There weren't many reasons not to either, aside from potentially breaking her heart if it didn't work out, but at least if that happened, they'd both be able to say they tried it and it didn't work. Though there was one problem, I'd love to, Hinata. But, I don't think this is the right time. Hinata's went through a roller coaster of emotions, fear, happiness, confusion, and back to fear. What do you mean? Naruto sighed and gathered his thoughts. Don't get me wrong, I'm not outright refusing. I'm just dealing with some stuff right now, and I need to take some time to get it figured out. Plus, I remember Ka-san telling Yui that trying to date when you've just stated as a genin is a bad idea, since you need to focus on learning and getting your career going. Oh, I see, Hinata said sadly, but she understood. Her own mother had told her something similar, and she didn't want to distract Naruto while he was trying to figure things out. Still, it hurt a bit. Seeing her crestfallen look, Naruto gave her a smile. Hey, how about I make you a deal? Hinata looked up, curious. Let's give it a while, long enough for me to figure my stuff out and you to get your shinobi career off the ground. Then, if you still want to, I'll take you out on a real date. Dinner, a movie, the whole 9 yards, how's that sound? Hinata perked up, you promise? Naruto gave a grin, I promise, and in Uzumaki never breaks a promise. He said, watching as a smile worked its way onto the girl's face. It was then that something caught Naruto's attention, 3 pairs of eyes watching them from behind a bush. Naruto's face turned into a deadpan stare, and he took aim with a chopstick, throwing it at one of the pairs, nailing his sister in the forehead. Yui jumped out of the bush holding her head, ow. That hurt, what the hell was that for? As if on cue, Konohamaru jumped out himself, we've been spotted. The last member of their little trio appeared as Hanabi popped out, running up to Hinata and giving her a hug. You did it, Ni-chan. Now you don't need to practice in the mirror anymore. Hinata blushed, glancing at Naruto, before patting Hanabi's head. Thank you, Hanabi. Naruto chuckled and looked over at Yui. So Strawberry, you gonna stop trying to play matchmaker now? Yui's eyes went wide before she turned away and tried to look innocent. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Unfortunately for her, nobody believed her. Even Konohamaru could see through her lie, and Eki, "I don't think anybody believes you." Naruto couldn't help but laugh as Yui deflated. She never was one for the more subtle aspect of being a shinobi. Then, something caught Naruto's attention, and Anbu had appeared in the garden, and it looked like he was whispering something to Minato. Naruto watched as his father gathered up all the others and seemingly started issuing orders. By now the others had noticed, and Naruto walked over with the others following, "To-san." Minato gave them a reassuring smile before nodding to Jiraiya, Tsunade, Kakashi, Shizune, and Hiruzen, who all quickly left. Minato turned to them, "Alright, all of you listen." Seeing the seriousness in his eyes, Naruto's own narrowed. "Something very important to the village was stolen, and we need to put the village on lockdown until it's found." He looked each of them over. "I need you 5 to stay here in the compound until it's all over, alright?" Yui nodded. "Are you going too, Ka-san?" she asked, surprised. "I thought you weren't an active kunoichi anymore." Kushina shook her head. "I'm not, but there's an old Fuinjutsu network that runs through the village. It's programmed to locate certain receptor seals, one of which is on the missing item. Unfortunately I'm the only one who knows how to work it and it takes up a lot of chakra, so I can't spare any to leave a clone here. Will you all be alright?" Naruto gave a short nod. "Don't worry about us, we'll be fine. The seals around the compound will keep us safe, and we have alarms tied into the Fuinjutsu arrays running through the house. Plus, what thief would be stupid enough to make his getaway through the clan district?" Kushina relented. "Alright, but activate the alarm seals if anything goes wrong. Naruto, you're in charge, make sure everyone stays safe, alright?" Naruto gave a mock salute. "You got it, now get out of here and find whatever you're looking for, that thief won't kick his own ass." With not much else to be said, Minato and Kushina headed off to join the search, while Naruto, Yui, and Hinata led Hanabi and Konohamaru inside the house. Once inside, Naruto and Yui took some time to head into Kushina's study, with Naruto having Yui channel some chakra into a wall to make a large Fuinjutsu matrix appear all over it. This was a matrix specifically designed to monitor all the different security seals and arrays placed around the compound. Naruto's eyes quickly scanned over the entire thing before nodding to himself, turning to see Yui looking extremely lost. Naruto gave a slight laugh. "It's all working, we're good." Yui jumped a bit. "Oh good." While Naruto had inherited the Uzumaki talent for Fuinjutsu, Yui just couldn't wrap her head around it. Bless her heart though, she tried her best to seem like she knew what she was looking at. With that done, they headed back into the living room to see Hinata setting up a board game to play. Well, they needed something to do until the lockdown was over at least. Some time later, Naruto didn't know exactly how long it had been since they started playing, but he did know that the game was about to be over. Not because anyone was close to winning, but because Yui was close to losing it. 3, 4, 5 pass deployment and get 2000 Ryo, keep going and village upkeep tax again. She shouted in rage, pulling on her twintails. That's like the 5th time that's happened. Hinata put her hands up to placate her best friend. "It's alright, Yui, it's not that bad, you still have the most Ryo out of everyone on the board." Irideed's eye twitched. "That's because I haven't been able to buy anything, miss, I own half the board." Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's getting to be everyone's favorite part of a game of Syndicate." Naruto saw that Yui was balling up a fist and got up to pull her away from the table. "Let's just find something else to do, alright?" With that, everyone started putting the game away while Yui paced around to work off her anger. They had been playing different games for the past few hours and it was starting to grate on everybody, none more so than his sister. Speaking of, she was now at the window, staring out into the night. "Yui, what's up?" Yui narrowed her eyes, opening the window and staring out into the trees past the compound wall. "I sent someone out there, they're practically radiating negative emotions." Hinata walked over and looked out. "Maybe he's part of the search party and just mad," she said, activating her Byakugan, only to gasp. "Wait, that's..." Yui turned, surprised. "What, who is it?" By now everyone had gone to the window. "It's Mizuki-sensei, and I think he's got the Hokage's forbidden scroll." She didn't know it was the forbidden scroll. But how many other big scrolls with the word forbidden on them could there be in the village? Naruto narrowed his eyes and went over to an alarm seal. "Yui, help me activate this," he said, only to be met with silence. Naruto turned around to see Yui jumping out the window, then he raced over to see her crouched on top of the compound wall. "Don't worry, I'll be back in a jiffy. I've always wanted to pound that jerk senseless," she said before jumping off into the night. "Damn it, Yui." Naruto yelled, sprinting toward the compound's door. "Hinata, there's an alarm seal on the doorway to the kitchen, activate it, then stay here and look after those two, I'll go get her and be back." Unfortunately, the seals didn't stop people from leaving in the event that the compound needed to be evacuated, then only kept people from getting in. Naruto quickly hopped over the front gate and sprinted toward where Yui ran off to. Their compound was on the edge of the district, so there was basically a forest beside it, and that's where Yui ran off to. Naruto took out his kunai as he ran through the trees, looking for any sign of Yui or Mizuki. After who knew how long, he finally heard something, the sounds of a fight. Naruto made it to a clearing and saw a silver-haired man with a bandana and a giant shuriken on his back, whom he could only assume was Mizuki, standing over his downed sister with a nasty sneer. The forbidden scroll was nearby, leaning against a tree. Naruto wasted no time in sprinting forward, trying to draw on his power. Apparently Mizuki was too absorbed in his apparent victory to notice Naruto until the blonde was upon him, with Naruto sending a hard punch right to his jaw. He flew back from the hit as Naruto knelt next to Yui. "You idiot. You shouldn't have run off like that. Are you alright?" Yui flinched at his yell, but nodded. "Sorry, I thought I could take him." "I'm okay, he just nicked me with a kunai," she said as Naruto helped her up, only for her to immediately fall again. "Ah, what?" The two were interrupted by a laugh, looking over to see Mizuki was back up, rubbing his jaw. Well, looks like the Hokage's one useless kid has some fight after all." He smirked as Yui continued to try and stand up. "Don't bother, that kunai was poisoned with a paralyzing agent. To be honest, I'm amazed you can move at all, looks like the fox is good enough for something after all." Yui grit her teeth. "Why the hell are you doing this? What are you planning on doing with that scroll?" Mizuki just kept laughing. Why the hell not? I slave away for this village and work my ass off, only to get stuck teaching you miserable brats. I deserve more, it's that simple." He said, "So I'm planning on selling the scroll to the highest bidder and living the high life." His smirk grew wider as Naruto got into a protective stance in front of Yui. "Oh, please, you're gonna stop me. You don't even have any chakra, you useless moron." Naruto held up his kunai. "I don't need chakra to beat some washed-up teacher." Apparently that flipped a switch in the traitorous Chunin, whose smile disappeared. "Oh really? I'm gonna enjoy this way more than I should." With that, he charged at Naruto faster than the blonde could see, his fist hitting home in Naruto's gut. Naruto let out a grunt of pain, thankful for the little bit of durability his power gave him. As his eyes started to be streaked with black, he grabbed Mizuki's arm and pulled the Chunin into a headbutt to the nose. Naruto then brandished his kunai and made a few swipes and stabs, all of which his opponent avoided. Mizuki held his nose for a second before glaring at Naruto. "Okay, kid, you're not bad, I'll give you that, but there's no way in hell you're beating me." Naruto said nothing, as much as he wanted to deny it, Mizuki might be telling the truth. But that didn't mean he could just leave, and he had the feeling Mizuki wouldn't let him even if he tried. Sadly for Naruto, he didn't get a chance to think on it much more as Mizuki attacked, this time not taking any chances. Naruto did his best to defend himself, but the Chunin was just too strong and fast for him to keep up with. Then, Naruto's arms flew up as Mizuki hit him with an uppercut, and his next attack went straight for Naruto's face, knocking him back and making him dizzy enough that he couldn't defend from the next kick to the gut. Naruto fell to his knees, breathing heavily. "Damn it, if I can just get one good hit with my kunai, I can end this. Come on, if all my wasted training is gonna pay off sometime, let it be here." He thought to himself, gripping his kunai. With a roar, Naruto lunged forward and threw out a quick combination of slashes with his kunai, but grit his teeth at seeing Mizuki dodge with that infuriating smirk. "Just hit him once," Naruto pleaded, his grip on his kunai turning his knuckles white as he made one more swing. Mizuki moved to dodge this one like all the others, but his eyes widened as a flash of green flame-like energy consumed the kunai's blade. As Naruto swung, the energy shot forward, slicing through Mizuki's vest and making blood fly through the air. After the swing was finished, the energy went away, leaving three very surprised people. None more so than Naruto himself, who was staring at his kunai like he was seeing it for the first time. Yui's voice snapped him out of his staring. "Nai-san, what was that?" Naruto turned, looking just as confused as her. I have no idea." They didn't have time to think about it, however, as Mizuku coughed, alerting them to his still being alive. Mizuku grit his teeth, rage clear in his eyes. "I don't know what the hell you just did, but you'd better believe I'm done playing around with you." He roared, pulling the giant shuriken off of his back and tossing it at Naruto. Without having much else to do, Naruto held up his kunai. Just for a second, the green energy flared to life and shot up, blocking the shuriken, though the force still knocked Naruto back. Naruto quickly got to his feet, only to be forced back on the defensive as Mizuki pulled out his own kunai and threw a flurry of quick strikes. Naruto desperately fought to block them all, his kunai lighting up every now and again to help, but it still wasn't enough. Some of Mizuki's strikes made it through, the point of his kunai stabbing into Naruto's arms and cutting into his flesh. As the fighting continued, Naruto started to become painfully aware of his kunai's energy starting to dim each time it was used. Apparently Mizuki had noticed too, as a manic gleam had appeared in his eyes. In a flourish of movement, Mizuki pulled out a second kunai with his free hand and stabbed it into Naruto's, forcing him to drop his kunai. Naruto let out a pained yell, only for it to be cut off as Mizuki used his other kunai to stab Naruto in the stomach. Mizuki gave a triumphant grin as he yanked his kunai from Naruto's gut, then spun and sent a kick into his face, sending Naruto to the ground. Naruto's vision started to fade as he hit the ground, and he was only slightly aware of Yui calling out to him. He had never experienced pain like this before. Was this what being in shock felt like? It sucked. Naruto looked over, just barely able to make out Yui struggling to crawl over to him, tears in her eyes. With a grunt of pained exertion, Naruto tried moving, only for a rush of blood to pour out of his wound as his strength seemed to leave his body. Naruto watched as Mizuki walked over to Yui, grabbing her by one of her twin tails. He had to get over there. That was his sister, he had to help her. No way in hell was he going to let some smug bastard hurt his family. Naruto struggled against the pain, pushing his body to move, to get up and fight. But however much he willed his body to move, nothing happened. He watched as Mizuki kicked his sister, before tossing her to the ground. I have to get up, I have to move. I don't care if it kills me, I don't care if I die here, I'll. Suddenly, the black in Naruto's eyes crept in further, starting to turn his iris yellow. I'll make him pay. Meanwhile, in a secure location underneath Anbu HQ, Kushina was hard at work trying to locate the scroll. Upon arriving at the matrix for the network, she'd realized that it had been left in a state of disrepair for decades. It was a bitch and a half to deal with, but she was fairly certain she could repair the damage. She just hoped that she could get it done fast enough to. Her head shot up from her work as a familiar pressure dropped onto her shoulders. This was. It felt just like the energy that monster used. No, it was the same type, but different. It actually felt familiar. Kushina's eyes widened in fear as she shot out of the matrix room, ignoring the calls of the Fuinjutsu Corps. Yui stopped, her eyes wide open. The temperature in the clearing had dropped and a noticeable chill was able to be felt. That wasn't what was scaring Yui though. What was scaring her was the feeling that she was getting from her brother. Both she and Mizuki could feel it, a pressure weighing down on them. It felt like their very souls were being squeezed. Yui looked over to see Naruto slowly getting up, bloodlust radiating from him. Mizuki dropped her, staring at Naruto as the blonde finally got to his feet. He was turned away from them, though they could see something gathering on his face. It looked like strips of some white substance were appearing out of nowhere and settling onto Naruto. Mizuki narrowed his eyes. What's this, huh? Another little secret you've been keeping. He grit his teeth and charged forward. This time I'll rip off your head. Nai-san. Yui yelled in fear, watching Mizuki rush toward him. Unfortunately for Mizuki, Naruto wouldn't be the one dying that night. Faster than any of them could see, Naruto turned and appeared right in front of Mizuki. The traitor's eyes widened in fear at the yellow eyes staring at him before unimaginable pain erupted from his torso. He tried to speak, only for blood to gush from his mouth. It took Yui a second to process what she was seeing. Naruto's arm was going through Mizuki's chest. It was like he'd just punched right through him. This was when she got a good look at his face. Naruto's whisker marks had darkened and become more feral, and his eyes had gone completely black with yellow iris, though that wasn't the most striking part. That would be what looked like a mask fragment forming over his eye. It was completely white, like bleached bone, with the only color being a blue mark that seemed to follow his whiskers. His face was completely blank, but Yui could feel the waves of anger and bloodlust rolling off of him. Mizuki managed to look up at Naruto, and the blonde opened his mouth, a small blue ball of energy forming in front of it. The traitor didn't even have time to scream as the ball turned into an enormous blast of blue energy, roaring with power as it carved through the forest, destroying anything in its path. It tore up the trees for a few hundred yards before it stopped, Yui forcing herself to turn back to her brother. She nearly lost her dinner as she beheld Naruto holding the corpse of her former teacher. His head, shoulders, and the top part of his chest was completely gone, with nothing but the cauterized remnants of his body remaining, arms on the ground. Naruto unceremoniously threw his arm to the side, Mizuki's body being tossed into a tree with a sickening crack. Yui watched Naruto simply stand there. Nai-san? She asked quietly, only to gasp in surprise as he appeared next to her. She was about to talk to him, only for him to grip her by the throat and lift her up. And Nai-san, wait. It's me. She said, struggling to breathe. She let out a yelp of pain as his grip tightened, and her eye widened in terror as he opened his mouth, allowing another ball to appear. Thankfully, she was saved as a plethora of golden chains appeared through the trees and wrapped around Naruto, one of them forcing his head back, the blast of energy shooting harmlessly up into the night sky. Another chain wrapped around his arm, squeezing it and forcing him to drop Yui. She barely had time to wonder what happened before Kushina rushed out of the trees, chains sprouting from her back. Kushina scooped Yui into her arms before jumping back toward the tree line. Yui realized her mother was there and quickly started to explain, only for Kushina to put a hand up. Not now, Yui. You can explain what happened after we help your brother. She said, watching as Naruto struggled and trying to break the chains. At least he wasn't able to break them. As if to mock her, a sudden snap was heard as one of the chains came loose. Kushina stood there, racking her brain to try and figure something out. But before she could think of anything, a pair of Anbu appeared on the scene and instead of asking questions, they ran through a chain of hand signs. Kushina recognized what they were doing and screamed, "No. Stop it, stand down." Unfortunately they didn't hear her and instead finished their techniques, Kaiten. Kakakyu no Jutsu. Futen. Tatapa no Jutsu. An enormous fireball flew toward Naruto and Kushina redirected some of her chains to defend Naruto, making a dome around him as she went through her own hand signs, Suiton. Miserapa. She intoned as a large amount of water rushed forward, crashing into the fireball. Some of the fire still got through the chains, but Naruto was saved from the worst of it. The two Anbu turned to see what it possesses Kushina to stop their technique, only to be knocked unconscious as Kushina beat them down with a single punch each. It was then that Minato arrived with his personal Anbu squad. "Kushina, what's going on?" Kushina looked up at him, but instead of answering, she simply made her chains recede, showing the still berserk Naruto, with a few serious burns on his body and most of his clothes ruined, and Naruto. "What the hell is going on?" Kushina shook her head, "I don't know, but he's not in control of his actions, he needs help." Suddenly, Naruto let out another roar, preparing a blast. This one was different, however. It was red and took a lot less time to charge, so Naruto aimed it down at himself, with the ball breaking most of Kushina's chains and carving a large wound down the length of his chest. He dropped to his knees and started to heal before everyone's eyes. It put even a Jinchuriki's healing factor to shame, the burns fading in seconds and the wound in his chest closing up and not even scarring over. Naruto stayed on his knees before he looked up at everyone, his bloodlust returning and stunning everyone with its intensity. Kushina may have been the only one able to feel the spike in his power, but everyone could feel that killing intent. An Abnu in a cat mask with a sword spoke up, "Hokage-sama, orders." Minato shook his head, still not quite able to believe what was happening. "Immobilize him, but do not hurt him." They were all forced to dodge as another blast of blue energy was shot at them, with one of the Anbu commenting, "I think that might be easier said than done, Hokage-sama." Everyone prepared themselves as Naruto got up onto his feet, seemingly preparing for another attack. Then, his hand shot up to the mask on his face. Everyone watched in surprise as Naruto seemed to wrestle with himself, desperately trying to rip the mask off. Then, with a final scream of pain, Naruto ripped it off, blood flying from him as he took some skin with it. Naruto's eyes returned to normal, filled with horror and fear. Naruto swayed for a bit before looking over at Mizuki's body. What did I do? I swear I didn't mean to," he said, his voice soft but still able to be heard in the silence of the clearing. Naruto looked down at his arm, caked in blood. "What am I?" he asked himself before his vision swam and he fell onto his back. The last thing he heard before passing out was his mother calling his name. In the Soul Society, Genryusai Shinjikuni Yamamoto wasn't easily surprised. Being over 2,000 years old meant that he'd seen a lot and naturally there weren't many things he hadn't seen or done. This was one of the rare times that the old man truly did feel surprised. He had been sitting in his office, alone, working on some paperwork when he'd gotten a visitor. It was a face he hadn't seen and he didn't even remember how long. In front of him stood a demonic-looking being with purple skin, horns, shaggy white hair, dressed in a white robe, with a tanto tucked in his belt. Yamamoto didn't show his surprise and instead simply raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's been a long time since you've visited the Soul Society. To what do we owe the appearance?" The Shinigami grinned, showing his sharp teeth. "I have a proposition to make." Yamamoto narrowed his eyes. "A deal with you? I already want to refuse." "Oh come on now, not like that. I've come across an interesting being and I want to discuss my plans for him with you," the Shinigami said, allowing a little chuckle to escape his lips. Yamamoto was silent for a minute. "Go on." Yamamoto watched as all the captains gathered in the meeting room. After hearing his colleague. After hearing the Shinigami out, he decided to bring the matter up with his captains. "Greetings, I'm sure you're all wondering why I've called this meeting." He asked them as they all stood in the meeting room. The voice made itself known, belonging to the newly reinstated captain of Squad 5, Shinji Hirako. "Is it about us? I know that our presence here in Soul Society is still a bit of a hot-button issue," he asked, indicating his fellow captains, Kensei and Rose. The ancient Shinigami shook his head. "No, it's not." Now, before we begin, his Ryatsu permeated the room. "Everything spoken of in this meeting is not to be repeated to anyone. Not even to your vice captains. Is this understood?" Seeing everyone nod, he continued, "We have been approached with an interesting offer, and to explain it, I would allow the one who brought it to us to speak." The Shinigami faded into view on the opposite side of the room from Yamamoto and was mildly amused as no less that 3-4 a lot of swords were pointed at him. "Oh come on now, I'm not that scary, am I?" Yamamoto tapped his cane against the floor. "Stand down." The captains seemed surprised, but they relented and returned to their spots. "Allow me to introduce our guest, known simply as the Shinigami. You are to treat him with the same respect you would afford me." Before we move on to his reason for being here, I believe you all must be made aware of a great secret which our guest is a part of. The Shinigami nodded and stepped forward. I don't have a name, but calling me Shinigami may get confusing, so just call me Shin for short," he said, giving a grin to the captains, which looked very sinister on his demonic face. "Now, where to begin? There is another living world, separate from the one you know." He ignored the shocked expressions on nearly every captain's face. "This world's existence has been kept a complete secret, with only myself and Yamamoto knowing about it. It was sealed off in its own little space by the Soul King, and don't ask me why, I don't know. I can only guess it had something to do with the humans of that world and their potential for destruction." At this point that the creepy captain of Squad 12, Mayuri Kuritsuchi, commented, "The humans of that world. Are they somehow different from those of the living world we know of?" he asked, a very unsettling glint in his eye. Shin nodded. "They are, yes. Back when I was created I don't know how many centuries ago, the world had just been sealed off and they were normal humans. I don't want to get into a long lecture about its history, but due to a giant tree and some troublesome fruit, the humans of my world are capable of utilizing an energy called chakra to do incredible things, walking on water, manipulating the elements as well as time and space, and some few of them even reach captain level or beyond." At this, he took a second to commit as many of the stunned faces to memory as he could, purely for entertainment purposes. "They call themselves shinobi. But I didn't just come here to let you all in on a secret. I came here, in part, because you all have inadvertently made my job much harder." Another captain spoke up. This one was the beautiful captain of Squad 4, Retsu Anohana. She was giving the Shinigami a calm stare. "Pardon me, but how exactly did we do that? We didn't even know about this other world until now, so I failed to see how we could have affected it. Too much power being used." The Shinigami said, "Over the last year or so, more Reiatsu has been thrown around than in the last 100 combined. Normally the barrier separating my world from yours will adjust itself and hold, but so much power being used so quickly became too much for it. Then, that one Shinigami, Aizen was it? His meddling with Waco Mundo, the battles between his forces and the Soul Society, and certainly not least his encroaching upon godhood were the last straws. The barrier is now permanently weakened and it's taking more of my time to make sure it holds. Meanwhile plus souls, which never appeared before now thanks to my timely gathering, are increasing. Not to mention hollows are starting to make their way in. Frankly, it's a mess, which brings me to my true reason for coming here, to ask a favor and offer an ally." Shin held out his hand, allowing a miasma to pool on the floor in the middle of the room, showing an image of Naruto. "This is Naruto Uzumaki. He lives in a region known as the Elemental Nations, and he's a hollow." Then, the image changed into more of a video, showing Naruto going berserk against Mizuki and everything that followed. "I first took notice of him 13 years ago, and I've been observing him ever since his mother was attacked by a hollow. She wounded it and held on long enough to force it to retreat. In retaliation, I believe the hollow attempted to kill Naruto by snuffing out his soul, which would turn him into a hollow the moment he died, instead of becoming a plus. However, as I said, these humans have incredible abilities and they were somehow able to revive his soul at the exact same time it fully hollowied. As I said, he's a hollow, but he's also alive." The image then changed to Naruto using his kunai and discovering its abilities. "There's also this, though I'm not sure what it is." Captain Yukite's eyes widened and he let out a surprised sound, gaining Shin's attention. "I believe I know what that is," the sickly captain said. "Sometimes, when pregnant human women are attacked by hollows and survive, the child is born with spiritual powers, and that green energy is usually its trademark. Their powers are tied to an object that they have an emotional attachment to, and last I heard, they called themselves Fullbringers. Well, they didn't run into them very often. Most captains did know that it was possible for humans to develop these powers." "Interesting," Shin said to himself. The next one to speak was the ever laid-back Shunsui Kairaku, who had been paying close attention to the video and noticed something. "Is it me or does it look like the humans can't see everything he's doing?" Everyone looked to the miasma. They're clearly staring at his mask, and they could obviously see the zeros. Shin nodded. "Yes, I noticed that myself. Using chakra requires a balance of physical energy as well as spiritual. As long as they keep their energies in balance, like all who use chakra are taught to do, then they shouldn't be any more spiritually aware than a human from your world. The only one who is aware that I know of would be his mother, who gained the ability to see spirits when the hollow attacked her. There is one key factor that I believe explains why they can see everything despite not being spiritually aware. Naruto remained in his physical body the entire time. Naruto can't use chakra. I believe that his chakra core, a sort of chakra generator in their bodies, just can't combine physical energy with his hollow Reiatsu, leading to his inability to use chakra. However, he still possesses physical energy, and I believe that it somehow interacts with his spiritual powers and makes them visible while he's still in his body. Of course, that's all just a theory," Shin said, taking note of the practically salivating Mayuri. Yamamoto let out a hum. As interesting as this is, I believe we are getting off topic. Shin looked up, giving a wave. Of course, my apologies. Now, on to my proposal. I could use a hand in my work, what with the barrier being weakened, the plus souls, and the hollows. So I propose that we make contact with Naruto and take him here to Soul Society to train and learn to control his abilities. Sensing a potential problem, Shin continued, allow me to explain my reasons. As per the rules the Soul King placed upon me, I can't interact with living beings unless I'm summoned, and the boy is still alive, so I can't teach him or do anything about him. Even if I could contact him, my abilities are completely different from you shinigami, so I wouldn't even know how to teach him in the first place. Obviously just leaving him be isn't an option, and I don't want to kill him just because of what he is. He then turned to look each captain in the eye. If we make him an ally, however, he could become an incredible asset to the Soul Society, not unlike that substitute shinigami who defeated Aizen, well before he lost his powers anyway. His powers have been growing day after day, and now that the proverbial floodgates have opened, his strength will increase by leaps and bounds. Plus, he could easily become a link between Soul Society and the rancor of Wako Mundo, smoothing over relations to prevent another war. It was clear that all the captains were in deep thought. Then the stoic captain of Squad 6, Byakuya Kichiki, spoke up. If he is a hollow, then how has he been able to keep his hunger in check? Surely he's still driven to devour souls. Shin let out a laugh. I believe that he's adapted to absorb the spiritual particles in the air from the chakra people radiate without even realizing it. He may even be able to feed simply by being in proximity to spiritually aware beings, us included, by eating the ryatsu we passively give off. He hasn't shown any signs of the hunger that usually plagues hollows, and I can't think of any other reason why. Of course, it could easily be that he simply doesn't need to consume souls. The fact of the matter is that he's the first of his kind, and we need to be prepared for the possibility that he has many unique qualities. He took a second to allow everyone to absorb all the information, so what do you all say? Everyone was silent before Shinji gave his trademark grin. I'm up for giving him a shot. Far be it from me to turn someone away just because he's got a little hollow in him, he said, accompanied by nods from Kensei and Rose. Captain Kamamura was next to speak. I agree. I will judge the boy by his character and not what he is. A fascinating subject. How could anyone pass up the opportunity to inspect such a specimen? Mayuri said, his own grin threatening to split his face open. All the other captains ended up agreeing, though some were a bit more hesitant than others. After everyone had voiced their agreement, Yamamoto closed his eyes in thought before nodding. Very well, Naruto Uzumaki will be brought to Soul Society for training. Shin have a large toothy grin. Perfect. Now all that's left to debate is the matter of who will be retrieving him. He got a few confused looks, so he elaborated. As I said before, I can't interact with any living being, so until he's in the Soul Society and out of the living world, I can't approach him. Given that this information is to be kept secret from the rest of Soul Society, it means that one of you captains will need to retrieve him. Yamamoto nodded. I had suspected as much. It's your jurisdiction, Shin. Who would you recommend? Shin shrugged. I'd recommend someone who can stay out of sight and won't draw attention. With all the different abilities present in the other world, it may be possible that someone can see spirits. At this, another captain stepped forward, the petite captain of Squad 2, Soifan. In that case, I'll go, she said with a small smirk. As the leader of the Onmitsukido, I can get in and out without anyone knowing I was there. Yamamoto thought for a second, then Captain Soifan will be the one to retrieve Naruto Uzumaki and bring him here to Soul Society. Shin will brief you on the specifics of the mission. Now, unless anyone else has anything they would like to add, this meeting is dismissed. All the captains made their way out of the meeting room, intent on digesting everything they'd learned, leaving only Shin and Soifan. How exactly do you want him brought back? The short captain asked. Shin hummed, we want him as an ally, so don't force him if you can help it. Even if you have to take a few extra days to convince him, is that understood? Soifan nodded. Good, it'll take 2 weeks, more or less, to tweak the barrier and allow a Sakaman to take you to the shinobi world. I'll come to you when it's ready. He reached into this robe and pulled out a scroll. In the meantime, this scroll contains the important information on the elemental nations, a map, important places to avoid, that sort of thing. Soifan nodded, took the scroll, and made her way out of the meeting room. As she left, Shin rubbed his chin and thought. For a second there, he could have sworn he sensed, oh, there it is, you can go too if you want, he said aloud, causing Soifan to look back in confusion. Shin simply chuckled and waved her off. Soifan sat down in her office, intent on studying the scroll Shin had given her. Truth be told, she was a bit excited for this mission. Heading into a continent completely controlled by shinobi was like the ultimate test of her stealth skills. She allowed herself a small smile as she unrolled the scroll, finding a map of the nations. She looked over the scroll, familiarizing herself with the nations and their topography. It almost feels like a fantasy, doesn't it? Reading a map about a place you never knew existed, the black cat sitting on her desk asked. Soifan nodded, running a finger over the map before freezing. Her head slowly turned to see a very familiar cat on her desk, waving at her. Why, Yuruchi-sama. The cat gave her a thumbs up. Got it in one, Soifan. Now let's get back to studying, it won't do for us to go headlong into unknown territory. Thus Yuruchi-sama, I was entrusted with this mission, you could be in serious trouble if you just tag along. Soifan said, giving her mentor a serious look. Yuruchi simply waved it off. Oh, it's fine. Shin told me I could go in the meeting room. Soifan raised an eyebrow before she remembered Shin seemingly speaking to no one. You mean you were there? Of course I was just planning on visiting you, but after the meeting was called I got curious. So I just hung around and listened in, and now we get to go on a mission together, just like the good old days. Yuruchi said, the grin on her cat face taking on a teasing look. Don't tell me you aren't looking forward to it, you know you are. As they unrolled more of the scroll, they came across another picture of Naruto. I wonder what he's like, as Shin said, he's a completely new being. Soifan nodded, I was wondering about that myself. According to what Shin said, he's a completely normal human at face value, but from what the video showed, he's completely animalistic when he loses control. Hell, he almost killed his own little sister. I have a feeling he's going to be an interesting one. It'll be fun to see how he reacts to my true form at the very least. Yuruchi said with a teasing grin. Soifan's eye twitched. Please, Yuruchi-sama, you shouldn't be doing such improper things. You're no fun. Chapter end. Chapter 3 On My Own. The blinding white light was the first thing that Naruto became aware of as he regained consciousness. He hissed in discomfort and squeezed his eyes shut, tiredly shifting his head around and lifting an arm to cover his eyes. Naruto slowly moved the arm and cracked his eyes open, blearily looking around as the light seemed to dim. It was then that Naruto became aware of the pounding in his head. It felt like someone was hitting him in the forehead with a hammer over and over again. His body ached too, but not the ache he'd gotten used to feeling after training, it was a deeper, sharper pain. As the light finally started to subside, Naruto opened his eyes and looked around. Everything in the room was blurry and dizzying, but that too started to subside soon enough. After what felt like an hour, Naruto was finally able to take a good look at the room around him. He was in a hospital room, that much was clear. But this room looked completely different from the rooms he was familiar with. The walls were an eggshell white just like the regular hospital, but there were no windows. As a matter of fact, the room looked entirely Spartan in appearance. Only the bare essentials needed to observe and heal a patient. Even the door was different, it looked like it was thicker and more secure than a normal one. Where the hell was he? Naruto slowly pushed himself up into a sitting position, groaning as his body protested. Naruto sat there before his arm brushed against something. He turned and saw that the bed came equipped with restraints, thick metal restraints that, thankfully, he wasn't locked up in. Naruto looked up as the door opened, in walked the familiar visage of Tsunade Senju, the slug Sannin and his godmother. She was holding a clipboard and looked like she hadn't slept in a while. Bachan. Where am I? He asked, voice crackling a bit. Tsunade jumped at hearing his voice, too absorbed in whatever was on the board, and stared at him. Once she realized that he was awake, she threw the clipboard to the side and sped to his bedside. You're awake, thank Kami. How do you feel? She asked, putting a hand on his shoulder and looking him over. Not great, but I think I'm okay for the most part. He said, allowing her to poke at him for a bit, running a diagnostic jutsu over him. What happened after I passed out, and how long has it been? She sighed, pulling up a chair beside his bed and sitting down. You were rushed here to Konoha's VIP medical ward, which is about 3 stories underneath Anbu HQ. As to how long, you've been asleep for almost 36 hours. Naruto said. The two were quiet for a bit before Naruto looked back up at her. So, what happens now, and have you been up this entire time? Tsunade gave him a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Naruto. You're not in trouble, though your Tusan wanted to talk to you alone as soon as you were able. She said, before shaking her head, and don't worry about me, I've been through worse than a couple days without sleep. Naruto gave a slight chuckle. I bet with her drinking, he almost forgot how strong she was sometimes. Well, if Tusan wants to talk, then we'd better not keep him waiting. Tsunade nodded and walked over to the door. Before she left, she turned and gave him another smile. Naruto returned it and watched as she headed out. He had a feeling she was going off to find somewhere to crash. It wasn't very long before the door opened again, with his father entering this time. Minato stood in the doorway and the two stared at each other for a minute before Minato offered a small smile and stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. Minato walked over and sat down, seemingly thinking about something. The two sat in silence, neither quite knowing what to say, before Minato spoke. Your Ka-san already told me all the details. At Naruto's confused look, Minato continued, about this power you have, that you were trying to use it. I'll admit, I was a little miffed at being the parent out of the loop. Naruto looked down at his kunai, running his fingers over the smooth metal. Sorry I tried to keep it a secret from Ka-san, but she sensed it. We talked and she made me swear to stop trying to use it. After that, I guess we just decided to keep it between us. It's alright, I'm not angry at either of you, I just would've liked to know about it before all this happened." Minato took a breath and ran a hand through his hair. "Can you tell me what happened?" "I already heard from Yui, but..." Naruto's head snapped up. "Yui, is she alright? I swear I didn't want to hurt her, I didn't mean to." Minato placed his hands on Naruto's shoulders. "Naruto, calm down, Yui's perfectly fine, and she doesn't blame you for what happened. After we finish up here, I was going to bring her and your Kasen in, okay?" Naruto calmed down a bit after this, taking deep breaths. "Now, I want you to tell me everything that happened." The younger blonde nodded, launching into his own story of what had occurred that night. How he'd ran out of the compound and chased after Yui, eventually finding her down by Mizuki and jumping in to defend her. He talked about what had happened with his kunai before finally coming to the part that they were both waiting for. "I was lying there and I couldn't move, but I kept trying to force myself to do something. I kept telling myself that I had to get up and that I had to help Yui." Naruto took a shaky breath, "Then something inside of me felt like it broke and something freezing rushed through my body. I could see myself moving, but I wasn't doing it. I mean I was, but I couldn't control myself. It felt like I was in a haze. I knew I had to stop, but I just couldn't." Naruto's grip on his kunai tightened. "When Mizuki came at me, I just acted. Before I knew what was happening, my arm was going through him. I saw the fear in his eyes as I charged that blast." He stopped, hesitant to continue. Minato leaned forward. "Naruto, what is it? I should have felt horrified, right? I killed someone," he said, his mouth going dry. "All I felt was nothing. I didn't feel anything as I killed him, no remorse, no shock, nothing. Then when I turned to Yui and grabbed her, it all went away and I was screaming at myself to stop. It was like I was thrashing around in my own skin, desperate to do something. Somehow I managed to get back enough control to move my arm. It felt like I was peeling my own face off, but I pulled the mask off after that. I passed out and woke up here." Minato sat there, absorbing what Naruto said, before his son's voice interrupted him. "I felt everything, Mizuki's blood on my arm, Yui's throat in my hand, Kasen's chains digging into me, even the Anbu's Kaiten jutsu," he said, starting to shake. Minato wrapped Naruto in a hug. "It's alright, Naruto. It's over now, just breath, just breath." Naruto nodded, following his father's guidance and taking a few deep breaths, managing to calm himself down as Minato pulled away. "2-sen, what's going to happen to me?" Minato heaved a sigh. "Nothing, Naruto. The official story is that Mizuki attempted to use a jutsu from the scroll which caused the blasts, but ended up getting himself killed. Everyone who was there is sworn to secrecy. But what if it happens again? I almost killed Yui if Kasen hadn't gotten there when she did." "Don't think about that, Naruto. Don't torture yourself by thinking about what could have happened and focus on what did happen. Your Kasen got to you in time and stopped you, now everything's fine." "Damn it, it's not fine. I killed someone and didn't feel a thing, and I almost vaporized Yui. What if it happens again and nobody can stop me?" Naruto asked, his voice rising. "I'm not normal, I could put people in danger, we can't just say it's fine and move on." "Naruto." Minato yelled, stopping his son's rant. "I understand that you're scared, but worrying like that won't help anyone right now. All we can do is be careful." He held up his hand when it looked like Naruto was going to respond. "We're not just going to sweep it under the rug, but we don't know what else to do. If you feel anything waking up, then find your Kasen, me, Jiraiya, or Tsunade and let them know, we'll figure something out." Naruto nodded, looking like he wanted to say more. The two sat there in silence for a bit before another thought entered his head. "What about my kunai? Does anyone know what happened to it?" Minato reached into his pocket, grateful for the change in subject. "Yeah, Yui grabbed it after you were taken here," he said, bringing out the knife and handing it to Naruto, with the both of them staring down at it with a puzzled expression. "I hope you don't mind, but I had it taken down to R&D to see if they could figure anything out. But they came up with nothing, it's just a normal kunai." But it was just one out of a standard set, Minato was sure of it. He'd bought the set and grabbed a random one to give to Naruto himself. Naruto held up the knife, staring at it with a puzzled expression. I know that look," Minato said with an amused smile. "You're still recovering, you can hold off on experimenting until after you're better." He couldn't help but let out a little chuckle as Naruto deflated. "Well, I'd better go get your mother and sister, they've been worried about you too. Just try to rest until we get back, okay?" Naruto nodded, then watched as Minato got up and headed for the door. His father turned back to give another reassuring smile as he reached for the knob and was promptly knocked to the floor as the door slammed open. Naruto barely registered a flash of red before something slammed into his midsection, clamping onto him. After a few seconds of confusion, he recognized the person clinging to him and let out a fond smile. "Hey Yui," he said simply, before turning to look at his mother entering the room. "Hey, Kasen." Ashina gave him a warm smile before turning and looking at Minato, who was holding his nose on the floor. "What happened to you?" "Well, recently I was hit by a door," he said, getting back to his feet. His wife simply shrugged with a mischievous smile. Well, think of it as karma for not telling us the second Naruto woke up, we had to ambush Tsunade in the lobby. While the two of them were having their moment, Naruto was trying to soothe his sister. It was plain to see that his being out of it had her worried. Truth be told, Naruto was grateful for the clinginess, just this once. He'd hoped Yui wouldn't be terrified of him now, and it didn't look like she was, so that was a good sign. Come on, Raspberry, I'm fine. Yui finally let go and pulled back, showing her reddened eyes. Sorry after you passed out, I thought you were I didn't know if you'd be okay. Naruto gave a slight smirk. Come on, I might not have chakra, but I'm not frail. A sudden thought is him, and his expression turned somber. Listen Yui, I'm sorry. She raised an eyebrow in confusion. I almost if Ka-san hadn't gotten there when she did. Yui shook her head with a little smile. It's okay, Nai-san. She said, patting her stomach. I know what it's like to lose control, remember? You don't have to apologize, I know that wasn't you. Yeah, Naruto said, mostly to himself, wasn't me. By now, Kushina and Minato had joined them, with Kushina leaning in to give Naruto a hug of her own. I'm so happy you're alright. You have no idea how scared I was. Naruto returned the embrace, and once it was done, he looked around. So how much longer do I have to stay here? Minato sighed and rubbed the back of his head and thought, well, other than being exhausted, they couldn't find anything wrong with you. Tsunade wanted to keep you for longer, but it became pretty obvious that they couldn't monitor your energy, so you're cleared to go home whenever you feel up to it. They figured that if there was nothing they could do, then you'd probably be better off in a comfortable environment. Though we will have to make daily trips to the hospital so Tsunade can check up on you. Naruto looked down at himself. Ah well, I've barely spent any time in this room and I already hate it, so help me up, Yui. Despite his parents' insistence on taking it slow, he and Yui worked to get him on his feet. Thankfully, all he had was a slight dizzy spell on the way up. Once he was on his feet, though he still felt tired and weak, it seemed like everything settled and he was able to move around easily. After everyone was convinced he could stand and walk on his own, they left him to get dressed, and before Naruto knew it, he was at the Namikaze family home and in his room. Much to his dismay, his mother had ordered him to bed the second they walked in the door. 3 days later, Namikaze estate. Naruto was sitting against a tree in the Namikaze estate courtyard, looking up at the sky. The last couple days had been boring, incredibly so, in fact. Between not being able to leave and Yui or his mother watch him like a hawk at all hours of the day, he felt like he was in some kind of prison, but at least it wasn't all bad, he didn't have to go to school, so there's that. However, even the euphoria of being able to stay home from school couldn't distract him from his real problem. His power. At first, it had felt far away, just like it had always been. But as he recovered, it started to feel different. Things had changed since the incident and he didn't know what to do about it. He didn't quite know how to describe it, but it felt awake. It felt like it was permeating every inch of his body, almost like what people said their chakra felt like when they first started molding it. All in all, it felt alive, and that freaked Naruto out. He didn't know how he'd managed to hide it from his mother, because if he hadn't he'd be at the hospital again, but his power was much more volatile now. Instead of only intense anger bringing it to the surface, it seemed like just the thought of it brought it out. He'd had to force it down a few times already today, and the one time he decided to allow it to rise, he'd nearly blacked out. He tried to bring up the subject with his parents at dinner the previous night, but they'd both made it clear that they wanted to pretend like the incident never happened. His father had also assured him that nothing was going to happen to him and that he should just try to live a normal life and forget about it. Easier said than done. Naruto knew that his parents meant well, they didn't want anything to happen to him. If people found out what he could do and what he did, then who knows how they would react. Best case scenario, he had to go through life with everyone around him, thinking that he might turn into a rampaging monster at any moment and kill them. Worst case, they think he's a threat and either want him dead or locked up for the rest of his life. Plus, there was also the possibility that people would want him used as a weapon. Naruto wasn't stupid, he knew from his father's grumblings that there was an advisor who was adamant that Yui be treated like a weapon, even if he didn't outright say it. If he found out that Naruto could become a rampaging beast that you just need to point at an enemy and leave alone, then he'd be a potential target as well. Despite wanting nothing more than to listen to his parents and pretend his power didn't exist, he just couldn't. It was almost a constant struggle to keep it down, and he couldn't help but wonder when the time would come where he couldn't hold it anymore. The way Naruto saw it, this could go one of 3 ways. 1, he manages to hold it in, and it never becomes a problem. 2, he learns how to control it and uses it for good. 3, he can't control it and eventually goes berserk again, and either this situation repeats or he's killed imprisoned. Option 1 was clearly the least likely, option 2 was good, but how could he control it if he didn't even know what it was or where it came from? The last option, well, he'd rather not think about how likely it was. So, his plan? Shoot for the second option, learn to control it and use it for good, then he'll never have to worry about it. It would require a lot of experimentation and more than a few close calls with going berserk. Actually, that was too optimistic, he'd definitely go berserk trying to control it. So, how would he go about it? He needed to find somewhere isolated where he could go berserk and not worry about hurting anyone while he regained control of himself, something he couldn't do in the village. The solution was immediately obvious to him. Leave the village. Well, he'd much rather take any other available option, he simply didn't have a choice. He couldn't do anything in the village, it was just too risky. It would require a lot of preparation, he couldn't exactly just stroll out and say he'd be back. Even if he managed to make it out of the village, he'd have to deal with being hunted and brought back, since his parents definitely wouldn't just let him go. Naruto stood up and walked back to his room, taking a seat at his Fuinjutsu desk. What to do? He muttered to himself, resting his chin on his arm and taking his kunai out. As he idly spun the blade around his finger by the ring, he stared at the wood of his desk, plans running through his head. First off, he'd need to get out of the village without anyone knowing, and he'd need to get as far away from the village as he could before anyone knew he was gone. As he stared down at his desk, something caught his attention, the school permission slip for their camping trip. He picked up the slip and read it over. 4 days and 3 nights out in the wilderness of the village. For character building and life skills today was Wednesday, and they left Monday morning at 7 o'clock. If he recalled correctly, Monday morning was also when a caravan of merchants left the village. Slowly, a plan started to form in Naruto's head. If he could convince his parents to let him go on the trip while convincing his sensei that he wasn't going, then he could hitch a ride with the caravan and use it to get out of the village. Nobody would even realize he was gone until his class got back. Though he'd probably have to dye his hair, his shade of blonde was rare and the guards would spot it among the others in the caravan easily. He could wear a cloak, but having the hood up would cause suspicion. Okay, so he had a way out of the village and a few days clear of being tracked, he was in the clear. Or not, he'd almost forgotten about the biggest obstacle to his plan, the Inuzuka and Aburum. Well, he didn't have to worry about the Aburum tracking his chakra, they did have insects that could track scent, and the Inuzuka's tracking skills were second to none. Since they made up the bulk of Konoha's best trackers, it was almost assured that one or more members of their clan would be sent out after him. He'd heard rumors that the Inuzuka in particular could track scents up to a week old. Even if that was an exaggeration, he didn't want to test it, so he had to find a way to erase his scent. Scent, he said to himself, reaching for his Fuinjutsu notebook. I knew I kept these for a reason. He said to himself as he flipped through the pages, eventually stopping on a particular page. His notebook was full of seal ideas that he'd toyed with over the years, and there was one that could definitely help him here. Scent was one of the few things that most shinobi couldn't erase. Of course there were ways to mask it and disguise it, but they couldn't completely erase it, but what if they could? Such was Naruto's thought process a few years ago when he'd started on this, the Kieru Kaori no Fuin, a seal tag specifically designed to diffuse and nullify the scent of anything it was placed on, including people. Naruto had been close to finishing it when he'd brought it to his mother to look over. She'd been thoroughly impressed by his ingenuity, but had advised him to be careful with it. If an enemy got their hands on it and learned how it worked, then the consequences would be disastrous for the Inuzuka. With that knowledge, Naruto had stopped working on it altogether, not wanting to risk it. Now, however, it just might be time to finish it. The next day, the camping trip. Kushina asked as she looked over the permission slip. It was just after they finished dinner, and Naruto had handed her the slip, asking both herself and Minato for permission to go. Naruto nodded with a grin. Yeah. I think it'd be fun, a few days out in nature, activities, all kinds of stuff. He said. Kushina read over the paper for a bit before looking up at Naruto, raising an eyebrow. Okay, now why do you really want to go? A small flinch from Naruto was all she needed. Aha. Okay, spill it, mister. Naruto swallowed nervously. What? I don't know what you're alright, you got me. He started, before noticing his mother's patented glare. I just want to get out of this damn house. I've been trapped in here for 3 damn days, I'm going stir crazy. The sudden bonk sounded through the house as Kushina's ever-ready bokken hit his head. Language. She said, before sighing. Naruto, I don't think it's the right time, you've only had a few days to recover, maybe we should wait a little longer. Come on, Kasan. I feel fine. Naruto begged. Kushina was about to refuse again before Minato spoke up, putting a hand on her arm. Naruto, are you sure you're alright? Naruto looked to his father with a desperate look and nodded. Minato seemed to search his face for a minute before turning to Kushina. We have to let him go sometime, we can't keep him locked up at home forever. Kushina opened her mouth to say more, looking back and forth between the two of them. However, once she saw Naruto's desperate face, she sighed. Alright. Naruto gave a fist pump, but if anything goes wrong, you come home immediately, okay? You got it. I'll take the slip to Shizuka-sensei tomorrow. Naruto said with a grin. A smile appeared on Minato's face, giving Naruto an amused look. Oh, so you're good enough to go back to school, then. Naruto stiffened before his shoulders drooped and he groaned, "Oh, geez, right as you said that my stomach started acting up, I'd better go to bed, I'll head over after school is over and drop it off," he said, turning and heading back to his room. Alright, step 1 was complete, now all he had to do was everything else. As he walked by the dojo, he heard the telltale signs of his sister training. A sudden thought came to his head, he needed to charge the seals with chakra. He didn't have any himself, so he obviously needed someone to do it. The problem was that they needed to be charged with a ton of chakra to work for as long as he needed them to, and who did he know that had a ton of chakra to spare and also didn't know enough about Fuinjutsu to know what the seal did. Naruto backed up a few steps before turning and heading in, seeing his sister practicing her Taijutsu katas, Hair Asbury. "Think you can help me with something?" Naruto called out to his sister. Yui turned with an annoyed look, "Stop calling me that," she yelled before dropping her stance and heading over. "What is it, Lemonhead? I need you to charge these for me," he said, taking out the 5 tags he had prepared with the finished seal. "I've been working on some of my older designs while I've been home and I need you to charge these to see if they work. Just as much as it takes to make a cage bunshin should be enough." He sat down and laid the tags on the floor. Yui raised an eyebrow at the seal and sat in front of them, putting a hand on one and pumping chakra into it. "Okay, what do they do?" "Disperses chakra signatures. You won't be able to use chakra without ruining it, but as long as it's on, sensors can't find you." Naruto lied. "Cool. Can I keep one?" Yui asked, though she had a feeling she knew the answer already. Naruto shook his head. "Sorry, gotta test them to see if they work first, you know the rules." After Yui had finished pumping the seals with chakra, Naruto picked them up and gave Yui a head pat. "Thanks, short stuff." Yui pushed his hand off and was about to go back to training before stopping, turning around to Naruto before he left. "Hey, Nai-san." Naruto turned back with a raised eyebrow. "Are you okay?" Naruto was surprised at the question. Yeah, why?" She shrugged. "I don't know, you just seem different." "I don't know why. I've been doing pretty well since you know," Naruto said, a bit uncomfortable now. Yui nodded. "Yeah, never mind them. I guess it was just my imagination." Namika's household, Monday morning 5 a.m. Naruto stared at his ceiling. It had come faster than he'd thought, but today was the day. Everything was set up and ready to go. He'd gone to school after it had let out on Friday and regretfully informed Shizuka-sensei that he wouldn't be able to attend the camping trip. She was a bit disappointed but didn't press the issue. Being out for a week due to family issues made it pretty easy. On the way home he'd stopped by a store and picked up a bottle of temporary hair dye and a small bit of makeup as an afterthought. Naruto got up and got dressed in some new clothes, a pair of charcoal gray shinobi pants with black sandals, a dark blue long-sleeved shirt and a dull green traveling cloak with attached hood. He patted his pockets, feeling the dye, tags, and comforting shape and weight of his kunai. Naruto picked up his traveling bag, containing a week's worth of provisions and some camping equipment. He left his room quietly, only to jump at seeing Yui right outside his door. Yui gave him a bright smile. "About time. I was just about to barge in and pull you out of bed myself," she said happily, grabbing his hand and dragging him to the kitchen, where he saw his parents and a table full of food. Naruto's confusion must have shown on his face, because Minato have a little laugh. "Your mother and I figured that since you were leaving today and Yui's going to team assignments, we should see you both off with a big family breakfast." Kushina nodded with a smile. "Yup. Now come on and dig in," she said as Naruto took a seat at the table. In that moment, they looked like the picture-perfect family. The mother and father eating breakfast with their 2 happy children. It was a sight that would warm anyone's heart. But all Naruto could feel was the raging storm of emotions inside of him. He questioned his plan, whether it was the right thing to do. Should he stay and tell his parents about his troubles? Should he continue with his plan? As he looked at each member of his family, he started to believe that he was making a mistake, that he shouldn't go through with this. That his family could help him through anything. Then his eyes landed on Yui, and all he could see was her terrified face as he held her by the throat that night. "Right, I almost forgot," Naruto thought to himself. "I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing it for them, so I don't hurt any of them. If I stay, then it's only a matter of time before it happens again. I can't back out now. I'll see this through, and I'll come back when I have control, I promise," with renewed conviction. Naruto looked up at his family, laughing at something he missed. "I love you all." They all stopped, surprised by his sudden words. "I know I don't say it often, but I really do," he said, reaching up to rub his eye. They all looked a bit concerned before Kushina gave a soft smile and walked over to him, giving him a hug. "We love you too, Naruto. No matter what happens, we always will," she said, and before Naruto knew it, it had turned into a family hug. None of them knew the true reason that Naruto chose to tell them that, and they wouldn't for a while. After they'd finished breakfast, Naruto had gathered his things and headed to the door, with his family there to see him off. He made sure to commit the scene to memory and wondered how they'd react if they knew where he was really going. He shook his head, he shouldn't be wasting time, I'll see you all when I come home. He said as he headed out the door. His face hardened as he walked down the street, a hand reaching into his pocket to bring out one of his Kyouri no Fuin tags slipping it onto his chest under his shirt, feeling its chakra wash over him. With all the chakra Yui pumped into them, each should last a full 24 hours before running out, but he'd still need to hurry. As long as he didn't run into anyone else, then he should be able to get out without much trouble. Naruto? A familiar soft voice asked, and Naruto turned to see Hinata coming down the street toward him. Naruto stopped and gave a grin. Oh, hey Hinata. What's up? I was just heading to the training field to do some exercise before team assignments. What are you doing up so early? She asked, raising an eyebrow at him. Oh, my class is headed on a camping trip and I'm off to meet them. Naruto said, shifting around and trying to look like he was in a hurry. Hinata nodded and looked like she was about to say goodbye. Then, something changed, whether it was a shift in his body language, a twitch, or some intuition that the girl had. She stared into his eyes, an unreadable emotion present behind her lavender orbs. All of a sudden, Naruto felt very strange. Hinata wasn't using her Byakugan, but Naruto still felt like she was searching him, trying to find something. His grin slowly fell away from his face, shuffling under her intense gaze. Finally, she spoke. Naruto, I care about you. You know that, right? Naruto was a bit stunned by the emotion in her voice. He'd never heard her speak like that, but he shook it off and nodded. Hinata then gave a small smile. I can tell you're hiding something, but I won't push. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? Naruto's face softened, and he gave Hinata a small, sincere smile. I promise, as long as you promise me something back. Seeing her curious look, he continued, look after Yui for me, please. She nodded and the two stared at each other for a minute before Naruto turned and kept heading toward the gate, throwing a hand up in a wave. As Naruto passed by a park, he looked around to make sure nobody was around and that he was out of Hinata's sight before slipping into the bathroom. He would have done this at home, but he couldn't risk his family walking in and asking questions, especially not after they'd all been waiting for him. Naruto stopped in front of a mirror, took his cloak off, and rolled up his sleeves, pulling out the bottle of dye. About 45 minutes later, Naruto left the bathroom, now sporting a head of brown hair and lacking his whisker marks. He slipped the makeup back into his pocket and tossed the bottle of dye in a trash can, starting on his way to the village gates. Once he arrived, he saw the caravan getting ready to leave and quickly walked up to someone who looked like he ran things, putting on a fake limp as he did. Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry, but I was wondering if I could ride on one of your wagons for a bit. I need to be on my way to Odafukugai and rolled my ankle. I'm willing to pay for the trouble. The rather rotund man wore a simple yellow yukata and sandals and was bald except for a large mustache adorning his face. The merchant looked him over for a minute, an unreadable expression on his face, before a jovial smile appeared. It's no trouble at all, my young friend. Climb aboard, we're just about to start on our way and no need to pay anything. He said. Naruto nodded with a grateful smile, making a bit of a show of getting into the wagon seat with his rolled ankle. Within a few minutes, the merchant had climbed into the driver's seat and urged the horses on. Soon it was their wagon's turn to be checked. Just myself, my young friend here, and my wagon. The Chunin guard nodded with a friendly smile before checking everything over. It was a bit of a close call when he gave Naruto a closer look, but a very un-Naruto-like shy smile assuaged him of any suspicion. After a few more wagon checks, the convoy was on the move. Naruto kept making subtle looks over his shoulder at the gates, watching them get farther and farther away. As they went, it truly hit Naruto. He just ran away from home and was on his own from now on. He waited for a good while after the village gates were out of sight before stomping his foot on the bench a few times. Well, I think my ankle's all good now, thank you again for this. He said with a grin. The merchant gave a friendly wave. You're very welcome. Then, just as Naruto was about to hop off, the merchant spoke again, his voice much more serious. I don't know what you're running from, my young friend, but good luck. Naruto froze before giving a simple nod and hopping off the wagon, then turned to watch the caravan continue on. Once it was out of sight, Naruto pulled his cloak around himself and started walking. As he walked, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his kunai, staring down at the blade. He hadn't played around with it since the incident, but he'd better learn how to use it if he was going to be out here on his own. Not really knowing what else to do, Naruto felt for his power and promptly saw spots. He pushed it back down when he realized that his kunai wasn't doing anything and let out a sigh. Figures it wouldn't be that easy. Let's see, what was he feeling the night he used it? Naruto held his kunai out in front of him, thinking back on that night. He wanted to beat Mizuki and protect Yui. So, Naruto tried to bring those desires back to the forefront of his mind, only for nothing to happen again. Damn it, work. He yelled out, and his eyes widened as a lick of green flame sprouted from the blade. A grin stretched across his face. Willpower, so that was it. Well, if there was one thing he liked to think he had plenty of, it was willpower. Naruto concentrated on his kunai, willing that energy to come back, willing his power to work. His grin widened when the energy returned, this time consuming his kunai and springing forward in a flash of light. Once the light died down, Naruto beheld his kunai's new look. Well, maybe that wasn't true, his kunai looked the same, but it was shrouded by a light green energy, with bits of blue flowing through. The energy extended from the kunai's tip, making a blade its own the length of a sword. Naruto swung it around a few times, it was practically weightless. He pointed the blade to the side of a tree. I wonder if I can make it. The blade shot out, piercing into the tree and slicing through. Longer, he wiled it to go back to normal and watched as the extra length dissipated, returning the energy blade to its normal length. With a single swing, Naruto dispelled the blade and returned his kunai to normal, his grin turning into a satisfied smile as he slipped it back into his pocket. He'd play with it more later. That night, Naruto bit into a piece of dried meat, poking at his small campfire with a stick. He felt like he'd gotten a fair amount of distance from the village by the time night fell and decided to set up camp a short distance from the road. He'd also washed the makeup off his whiskers and had the urge to do a little experimenting, the kind he couldn't do while walking. Throughout the day he'd been trying to bring his power to the surface without losing control, and he was proud to say that he was getting results. Nothing too big, but he was at least able to bring it out without losing control. There was really only one thing that he wanted to try, but if he could get it to work, then his arsenal would be significantly expanded. Naruto got into his bag and pulled out a small scroll and his fuinjutsu supplies. While he couldn't actually use them, he still felt like bringing them with him would be a good idea. Naruto quickly drew a standard storage seal on the scroll, then hefted a good-sized rock and placed it in the center of the seal. He took a second to close his eyes and focus, carefully directing a bit of his power into his hand and then pushing it into the seal. At first, nothing happened, then the seal seemed to glow. Naruto watched with excitement before a loud crack echoed through the area. Naruto jumped back, startled at the sudden noise, before looking at the seal. The rock had shattered, broken and reduced to a pile of pebbles. Naruto let out a disappointed sigh. Damn it, here I thought I was onto something. He'd hoped that his energy could be used to power fuinjutsu, but apparently not. He should have figured as much. The ink used in fuinjutsu was specially created to be infused with and react to chakra, and his energy was definitely not chakra. Though, it wasn't a complete failure. While the seal may not have worked, it did react to his energy, meaning that it was at least similar to chakra. Deciding not to mess with it anymore that night, Naruto put out his fire and retired to his tent for the night. 3 days later, Naruto walked down the road with his kunai, once again practicing with it while he walked. The noontime sun beating down on him as he went. He still had no real idea where he was going, but it didn't matter much to him, as long as he could find somewhere to train, then it didn't really matter where it was. Of course, it was kind of hard to pay attention to those things anyway, since most of his attention was focused on his kunai. In addition to lengthening the blade, he could also increase its width and thickness, all without any additional weight. He had also discovered a few additional ways to use it. He could change the shape of the blade and even launch projectiles and energy waves. Though those abilities took up a lot of energy. Speaking of, he'd discovered something interesting. He'd originally thought that his own powers and his kunais had been separate, but after using it more, he'd realized that this wasn't the case. His power that had caused him to go berserk was definitely what was fueling his kunai, of that he was sure. Though for some reason, using his kunai presented no problems for him. He never felt like he was going out of control or that he couldn't control it. While he was interested to know that his kunai's power came from him, it left him with more questions than answers. Why was it that channeling his power through his body turned him into a monster, but channeling it through his kunai was so easy? He'd racked his brain for answers before deciding that it wasn't worth thinking about. At least not yet, he just didn't know enough about his powers to come up with anything. Naruto put his kunai away and looked up to the sky, a sudden thought hitting him. His family would be realizing he was gone by now. He could only hope that they took it well. That wasn't going to happen, was it? Kushina hummed a little song to herself as he walked toward the school. Naruto's class was due back now and she intended to meet him at the school and take him out for ramen. Apparently they had a speech they like to give all the students after the trip every year, so they took all the classes back to the school for a bit before releasing them. She got to the school to see that the students were just being let out, so she stood by the gate with some other parents and waited for Naruto. However, she never saw him leave, wondering if he stayed behind or was being given another talking to from his teacher. Kushina headed in and looked around until she found his teacher's office. After knocking and being called in, Kushina gave a smile. "Hello Takahashi-san. I was just looking for Naruto. I hope he didn't cause any trouble on the trip." Shizuka looked up from her papers and blinked in confusion. What? I thought Naruto-san was staying home due to family business. The two women stared at each other in confusion before Kushina's mind started running a mile a minute. Naruto didn't go on the trip, then where was he? He certainly wasn't at home. Where could he have gone? Why would he lie to his teacher and his family? She tried thinking about any warning signs that she may have overlooked, anything that might tip her off about Naruto's whereabouts. Then, something he said right before he left came to the forefront of her mind: "I'll see you all when I come home." Why had he said it like that? Why would he use those words? That didn't sound like someone going on a trip for a few days, that sounded like someone who was. Suddenly, a puzzle she didn't even know she was looking at started to fit together. Naruto's sudden willingness to drop the incident after it had bothered him so much, his unusual attitude the few days before the trip, and how emotional he was the morning he left. The morning he left. Minato stretched in his chair. After all the craziness the past week, he was almost grateful to return to the office. Though he definitely didn't miss the paperwork, there were a few extra forms to fill out dealing with the theft of the Forbidden Scroll, but thankfully none of them dealt with Mizuki's death in great detail. He hated having to lie to the clan heads, since most of them were his friends, but he had to protect his son well. At least things seemed to be going back to normal now. That train of thought was brutally derailed as Kushina slammed open the window. Naruto left the village. She quickly grabbed Minato and dragged him toward the window. "We have to go now. He's got a 4-day head start on us, the real me is already back home getting ready." Minato's eyes widened. "Anbu." His personal guard appeared. "Get me Kakashi, then go to the Inyazuka compound. If Tsume is available for a mission, then bring her to the Namikaze compound. If not, or then the next best tracker they have, go." As they all nodded and disappeared, Minato followed Kushina's clone. "What happened?" he asked as they made their way to the house. "I went to the school to pick Naruto up, but his teacher said that he never went with him. I know I might be jumping to conclusions, but the way he acted that morning didn't feel like someone just going on a trip for a few days," Kushina's clone said. "Damn it, how did we not notice?" Minato asked rhetorically. "But why would he leave?" Kushina was silent for a minute before answering. "He must have been afraid. He hid it well, but I could see that the incident still bothered him. He tried to talk to us about it, but we just tried to sweep it under the rug. I think he was so afraid of it happening again that he decided to leave, so he wouldn't hurt anyone. At least, that's what I think." The two traveled in silence before arriving at the compound, with Kushina's clone dispelling as the real one came out of the house wearing her Jonin uniform. Minato looked like he was about to speak, but the arrival of Tsume and Kuromeru along with Kakashi stopped him. Kakashi looked serious. "Sensei, what's going on?" It must be serious if he was pulled away from his genin right in the middle of training. Minato looked between him and Tsume. "Naruto left the village, and I need you two to go track him down. I know this is sudden, but..." Tsume stopped him with a wave. "I wondered what got you so serious." "Well, don't worry about it, Minato. If one of your pups is gone, then I'll help you find him." She meant it too. The Inyazuka were very pack-oriented. Minato was a friend of hers, and his kid was missing. That was all she needed to know. Kakashi nodded. "Of course I'll go, but why would Naruto leave?" Kushina shared a look with Minato before making sure that nobody was within earshot. She then explained the truth about what happened the night the scroll was stolen. "Naruto stayed and all. We believe he left because he was afraid of what would happen if it happened again, or to protect us from it." Both Tsume and Kakashi looked stunned at the news, and she couldn't blame them. They were about to get started before a sudden voice interrupted them. "Nai-sen is gone." They all looked to the side to see Yui standing there, tears building in her wide, scared eyes. What do you mean he's gone?" Kushina quickly went over to her and hugged her. "It's okay, Yui will bring him back, I promise." Yui nodded before she returned the hug, trying valiantly to keep from crying. Minato looked at Tsume and Kakashi, giving them a signal to get started on getting Naruto sent, and went over to Kushina, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Kushina, I think you should stay." Seeing her about to argue, he held up his hand. "We can trust Tsume and Kakashi with this, you know they're some of the best. Plus, Kakashi needs someone to look after his team while he's gone." Minato leaned in, "But most importantly, Yui needs us right now." Kushina was conflicted for a bit before nodding with a sigh. Not long after, Kakashi and Tsume came out of the house, Pakin sitting on Kakashi's head. The small group of 2 humans and 2 dogs quickly set out before stopping a short ways away from the house. Pakin sniffing the air before turning to Kuromeru. "Please tell me that's not just me," the pug said with confusion. Kuromeru gave a few sniffs himself. "No, it's not just you." The larger dog said before turning to Tsume. "We've got a problem." "I noticed," Tsume said, her eyes narrowing. She turned to look back at everyone else. "His scent ends here. It's like he just disappeared into thin air." Minato and Kushina's blood ran cold. Naruto must have planned this. But how could he have erased his scent like that? Then a thought came to Yui, and she removed herself from Kushina's arms. "Wait. Nai-sen asked me to put some chakra into some fuinjutsu tags he had. I don't know what they did, but I remember that the kanji for scent was in the middle." Kushina's eyes narrowed in though, before she groaned. Kieru Kaori seeing everyone else's confused look, she elaborated. "It's a seal Naruto created, it can diffuse and erase the scent of anything it's attached to." Naruto stopped working on it after I pointed out how it would affect our own trackers if enemies got a hold of it. He must have finished it. Goromaru blinked his one good eye. Well, shit, he said before sighing, looks like we're doing this the old-fashioned way. Akin nodded, I guess so. Hey Kakashi, you might wanna summon the others, we need all the help we can get now. Kakashi nodded and summoned the rest of his dogs before the group headed toward the main gate. They highly doubted Naruto used any of the others, they were rarely used by anyone other than shinobi, so the guards would be much more aware of anyone using them. Kakashi was sure Naruto was smart enough to avoid drawing attention, so pretending to be just another traveler using the main gate was the only option. Once they arrived, they all went straight to the gate guards, who were understandably nervous at the two serious shinobi and the pack of dogs. Let me see the entrance and exit records for Monday. The guard nodded and went through the daily records, handing them the correct sheet. Tsume grabbed them and looked through, not even bothering to ask if he'd seen Naruto. If he had, then they wouldn't even be here and Naruto would be at home locked in his room. Tsume growled as she looked through, no individuals, just a few wagons and a caravan. Was there anyone suspicious on this merchant caravan? The guard thought for a second, I don't know about suspicious, but there was this kid who I thought looked really familiar. He was a guest I think, brown spiky hair, blue eyes. I don't know what made it stick with me, but I could have sworn something about him was off. Kakashi nodded, looking down at the road. The caravan's tracks were still there, but he doubted they'd still be clear the whole way. Where were they headed? The fire capital, Kaishi. Tsume handed back the file and turned to Kakashi, let's get to work. A few days later, Naruto scratched the top of his head in thought. He was currently standing on a small misty dock that jutted out from the road, with his map in his hands. Apparently Nami no Kuni was straight ahead, and since the road stopped here, there should be a ferry or something to take him across, right? Then where the hell was it? He put his map away and looked around, it didn't look like anyone had been here for a while. Well, maybe he could find a boat or something. Naruto headed toward the building back near the beginning of the dock, it looked like it was sitting on the water, and there was a large side door that opened up on the water's surface, so there should be a boat inside. The door was locked and it didn't sound like anyone was inside, so Naruto pulled out his kunai and gave a few swings. With a few cuts with his energy blade the door was off its hinges and no longer an issue. Naruto stepped into the building, looking around for a light switch. Unfortunately for him, it didn't look like they were working. Thankfully the roof was so full of holes that he had decent enough light to look around, and sure enough, there was a rowboat bobbing along in the water. He spent a few minutes looking around for a way to open the side door before he decided to just say fuck it, hopping into the boat and extending his kunai's blade to cut that door off too. Within a few minutes he was rowing across the water, and while the boat had clearly seen better days, it did its job well. Naruto rowed in silence for a while, trying in vain to spot anything that could guide him in the soupy fog that surrounded him. Just when he was about to give up, a large shadow loomed over him and he looked up to see a gigantic bridge. Oh well, that's convenient. At least now he had some idea where he was going. As Naruto rowed, he couldn't help but notice the lack of work sounds coming from the bridge. Were they on a day off? A sudden creaking and snapping sound interrupted Naruto's thoughts and he turned to look at the boat with a deadpan stare. It sprung a leak, of course it did. Naruto gave a dramatic sigh and grabbed his bag, stuffing his cloak inside before holding it over his head as the boat slowly sank into the water. Well, at least this would wash the last of the dye out. Once the boat was completely gone, Naruto looked at the bridge for a reference and started swimming. It was a bit hard to do with one hand, but he'd rather not test just how waterproof his bag was. Pretty soon he finally saw Nami's shore, tossing his bat onto dry land and hauling himself in. Naruto lay on the ground for a bit before pushing himself onto his hands and knees, only then becoming aware of the person staring at him. It was an old man, with a small pair of glasses, a large backpack, a bottle of sake, and a straw hat. Hey, how you doing? He blinked a bit, fine. Did you swim the whole way here? Naruto grabbed a bit of his hair, pleasantly noting that the dye had indeed finally washed out. Nah, found a boat on the dock across the water. Took it most of the way here before it sprung a leak. This is Nami no Kuni, right? The old man nodded, yeah, that it is. You also picked a hell of a time to visit. Name's Tazuna, I'm a bridge builder. Naruto Uzumaki, traveler. I guess he walked up and sat next to Tazuna. So, what's going on around here that's so bad? Tazuna sighed and took a swig of his sake, you know Gato. At Naruto's blank look, he elaborated, he's a shipping tycoon. Came to Nami and started bleeding us dry, controlling all the ports and strangling trade. He and his goons run things now, and the rest of the country is so poor we're barely surviving. He rubbed his forehead in frustration, people homeless, nowhere near enough food for everyone, kids out on the street in rags. Naruto flinched, damn, there's nothing you guys can do. Well, there's my bridge. If I can finish it then Gato's stranglehold on the nation is broken, only problem is that he knows it. I was going to head to Konoha to hire some shinobi to protect me, but it looks like my ferryman's bailed on me. We agreed to meet here 2 hours ago. He shook his head, anyway kid, if you know what's good for you, then you'll hightail it back to the mainland and forget about this place. Naruto sat in silence for a bit, it would be best for him if he just headed back and went somewhere else, but he couldn't just leave. What kind of person would he be if he just turned tail and ran when people needed help? Despite not being a shinobi, Naruto still wanted to help people, that was one of the main reasons he was traveling. So he could control his abilities and use them to help people. Naruto took a breath and stood, nope, not leaving. As a matter of fact, if you can't get to Konoha, then I'll protect you. Izuna looked up at him in surprise, I appreciate the offer kid, but Gato's men are real killers. They won't care how young you are, they'll gut you like a fish. Naruto grinned and pulled out his kunai, trust me old man, I'm not defenseless. I might not be a shinobi, but I can keep you safe, alright. Seeing Izuna about to speak again, Naruto put a hand up, don't even bother trying to convince me otherwise, I'm protecting you whether you want me to or not, I promise. The old man sputtered for a bit before sighing and getting up and giving Naruto a grateful smile, well, if you're dead set on it, then I won't stop you. Come on, let's head to my home, you can stay with me and my family. A few miles away, the traditional sliding door was the last thing that anyone would expect to see on Nami's coastline. Especially when it appeared out of thin air. Of course, that was dependent on whether or not they could see it, and it was certain that a normal person wouldn't see this one. It slid open with a bright light shining out as Soifan and Yuruchi, in her human form, stepped out and into the elemental nations. The door closed and disappeared behind them as Yuruchi took a deep breath, man, it already feels different from the Soul Society and the living world. I can't wait to do a little exploring. She said with a mischievous lilt to her voice. Soifan huffed, Yuruchi-sama, we're supposed to be searching for the boy, remember? Hopefully it wouldn't take too long. It had taken 2 full weeks to prepare a Sukeman to this world, but thankfully Shin let them out somewhere near where Naruto should be. Now they just had to look around for him. Yuruchi waved her concern off, please, that won't take long at all. You sense it too, right? Sense wow, that. A hollow, unmistakably. But it was different, she didn't know how to describe it, but this hollow felt unique compared to any she'd encountered before, that must be him. Yuruchi gave a cat-like grin, only one way to find out. Race you there, little bee. She said before disappearing in a burst of speed. Soifan stared at the spot she stood in for a second, wait. That's not fair, Yuruchi-sama. Naruto and Izuna were walking through Nami's woods when Naruto suddenly held his head. Izuna looked over with concern, you alright? Yeah sorry, just a headache. That was a bit of a lie, Naruto's head wasn't hurting, but something was going on with it. He hadn't noticed, but his ability to sense people had gotten stronger. He guessed that being by himself for so long hadn't really given him a lot of opportunities to notice. He could sense Izuna through the fog as clear as day, and it only now occurred to him that his sensing might not just be a strange intuition thing. What if it was something his power gave him? With that thought in mind, Naruto closed his eyes and focused on the things he was sensing. What followed was amazing. He could feel everything around him, the plants, the trees, insects, even goddamn rocks. How the hell could he do that? Though one thing bothered him, the rocks, trees, and other inanimate objects had a different feel. He couldn't describe it, but they felt dormant, like they were just there. However, the plants and Izuna felt different. They were bright, lively. Well, truth be told, the plants were a bit of a mix, but Izuna definitely felt lifelike and dense. So that must be what a human, her chakra, felt like. So why did the mist feel a lot closer to that than it did to the small lake in front of them? He got his answer when something appeared right on the edge of his range. Something was flying toward them really fast, get down. Naruto yelled as he turned and tackled Izuna to the ground, just as a gigantic sword flew over their heads and embedded itself in a tree. Naruto got to his feet just in time to see someone appear standing on the handle. Naruto pulled out his kunai, holding off on activating it for now, and watched as the man turned around, revealing a scratched Kiri hit eye. Fuck, Naruto said to himself. He chuckled, I thought you were just some random kid, but if you dodged Kubikirabacho then you might have some skill after all. He hopped off, wrenching the sword out of the tree on his way down and setting it on his shoulder, but killing kids who can't fight back leaves a bad taste in my mouth, so I try to avoid it if I can. I'll give you one chance to leave the bridge builder and go, kid. But know that if you refuse, I'll have to kill you. Naruto swallowed nervously, every fiber of his being telling him to get the fuck out of here. Izuna came up beside him and put a hand on his shoulder, it's alright kid, don't throw your life away for me. Silence reigned over the clearing for a minute before Naruto stepped forward, I promised I'd protect you old man, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do. The rogue shinobi raised his brow, you serious kid? Do you have any idea who I am? Suddenly, before Naruto could do anything, his opponent appeared right in front of him, his killing intent bearing down on the blonde like a ton of bricks. I'm Zabuza Mamachi, the Karigakur no Kijin. Naruto's eyes widened, he knew this guy looked familiar. He'd read through some of his parents' bingo books in his spare time, and this guy was a prominent figure, the guy who killed a bunch of academy students. Zabuza chuckled sinisterly, "Oh, so you've heard of me, that makes this a lot easier." He narrowed his eyes at Naruto, though there's one part they always leave out. "I wasn't even in the academy when I slaughtered all those weaklings. I just thought it looked fun and decided to tear them apart." Naruto's blood ran cold. "Do you really want to do this?" Naruto grit his teeth and tightened his grip on his kunai, matching Zabuza's stare as a slight weight settled on the swordsman's own shoulders. "If I run now, then I know I'll never forgive myself. I didn't leave home just so I could run away when things got difficult." Zabuza stared for a second before sighing, "Shame." Before Naruto could react, Zabuza's massive blade swung around and slammed into his side. Naruto let out a pained yell as he was thrown away, a large gash in his side. Naruto slid along the ground for a bit before stopping himself. The cut was bleeding severely, but he managed to push himself up through the pain and activate his kunai. With a grunt of exertion, Naruto rushed forward and swung his sword as he went, a wave of green and blue energy rushing forward. Zabuza's eyes widened as he pulled his blade around to block it. The force of the blast pushed him back a bit as Tazuna ran back to give them room. Naruto stopped between Zabuza and Tazuna, holding his side, staring defiantly at his opponent. Meanwhile, the swordsman was trying to process what had just happened. That hadn't been his strongest swing, not by a long shot, but it should have been enough to bisect the kid. Instead, he'd just gotten an admittedly nasty wound, only to get up and rush him, sending an energy wave from his kunai as he went. Zabuza looked over the blade, suddenly very interested in it. At first he thought it was Futon chakra, but now that he got a better look, that wasn't it at all. Once again, he appeared in front of Naruto, this time sending a sharp kick to his injured side and grabbing the kunai from his hand. As Zabuza expected, the energy went away as it left the kid's hand. He looked the blade over for a bit, surprised to find that it was just a regular kunai. He channeled a bit of chakra into the knife, only to give pain grunt as the chakra was forced painfully back into his arm. As he examined the kunai, Naruto scrambled back onto his feet. "Hey, give that back." Zabuza gave him an unimpressed look. "Oh, sure thing," he said sarcastically, only for the kunai to disperse into energy and reform in Naruto's hand. They both stared at the knife for a second, Naruto looking just as surprised as Zabuza. The blonde shook himself out of his surprise and pointed the tip at Zabuza, reactivating the blade and shooting it out. Zabuza dodged the blades, the subject of his curiosity changing to Naruto himself. Naruto swung his kunai in an arc in front of him, creating floating blades that flew at Zabuza, with the shinobi dodging or blocking them. Then it was his turn to be surprised as Naruto appeared in front of him, having ran up while Zabuza was distracted. Naruto lifted his blade above his head, the energy blade around his kunai, drastically increasing in size until it was as big as the Kubikirabacho. Naruto swung his sword down, forcing Zabuza to block. Now this was interesting, a sword as big as his own, with only the weight of a kunai to account for. While it was clear that Naruto hadn't fought with a sword much, he clearly had training. As the two fought, Zabuza noticed something about how Naruto moved. It looked like he wasn't even bothered by his wound now at all, deciding that he needed to check it out more closely. Zabuza knocked Naruto's blade away and tossed him into the lake, watching as he sputtered to the surface. Naruto only had enough time to realize what had happened before Zabuza showed up beside him, Suro no Jutsu. The next thing Naruto knew, he was suspended over the water, trapped in a sphere of it. While he looked around, Zabuza took a closer look at Naruto's wound, only for his eyes to widen as he saw that it was completely healed. Naruto looked like he wasn't even aware of it, but there wasn't even a scar. A sudden thought entered the rogue shinobi's mind, maybe he should take the kid with him. He could always use another accomplice, of course it might take a bit, what with having to kill the bridge builder. Zabuza created a water clone, having it take over the prison while he went to finish off Tazuna. Meanwhile, Naruto desperately looked around his watery cell, trying to find a way out. It was so damn hard to move in here, he couldn't even swing his kunai. Come on, there's gotta be something I can do. He thought to himself, watching as Zabuza took his time terrifying Tazuna with his approach. Naruto strained himself trying to think of a way out of this mess. Come on, I don't care what I have to do. I can't let this happen, I will not let this happen. After a moment of thought, Naruto grit his teeth and called to his power, allowing it to flow through him. A familiar blackness started to creep through his eye, and in a flash of light, the prison was broken and Zabuza's clone dispelled. Both Tazuna and Zabuza turned around to see what had happened, and they were both surprised at what they saw. Naruto knelt on the lake's shore, what looked to be a piece of bone falling from his face. Though what really caught their attention was the sword he had stabbed into the ground. The blade was triangle-shaped and about as long as a katana's, with the bottom points of it extending past where the blade met the handle, making it look more like a thin arrowhead about 8 inches wide at the bottom points. The blade also had 3 circles cut out of it, getting smaller as they went up the length and stopping at a little over half the total length. The handle was a little over a foot long and wrapped in blue cloth, with a 3-inch long spike that looked much like a kunai blade as the pommel. The entire thing was made of a gleaming gray-black metal, with the edges gleaming silver and razor sharp. Lastly, it had his shifting blue and green energy lightly flowing around the holes. Naruto looked up at them, black shifting on the edges of his sclera. He hauled himself to his feet, yanking the sword out of the ground and pointing at its abuser, his energy licking the blade. You and I aren't done yet. Chapter end. What if Naruto fall in love with Shinigami Mother Bleach? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.